Kính thưa, kính thưa các quý vị đại biểu khách quý, xin kính mời các quý vị đại biểu ổn định chỗ ngồi để diễn đàn chuẩn bị được bắt đầu. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. Our forum will commence in a few minutes. Thank you. Kính thưa các quý vị đại biểu, các vị khách quý, xin kính mời các quý vị đại biểu, các vị khách quý ổn định chỗ ngồi. Chương trình của chúng ta sẽ bắt đầu trong ít phút. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. Our forum will commence in a few minutes. Thank you. Investment. Mr. Matthias Cormann, OECD Secretary General. Madam Nguyễn Hồng. Equity. We also welcome the participation of leaders of different localities, heads of delegations, ambassadors, senior officials, representatives of international and regional organizations, research institutes, business communities of OECD and Southeast Asian countries. To begin, we would like to invite all distinguished leaders, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, to direct your attention to the screen on a video clip. A briefing video clip of Vietnam investment environment. Hai gì chị? Ba mẹ đâu? Không ra đâu cũng vừa gì cũng được. Các bạn nào gần nhất là được. Kính thưa các quý vị đại biểu, các vị khách quý, xin chào mừng các quý vị đại biểu, các vị khách quý đến với Diễn đàn Đầu tư Việt Nam OECD ngày hôm nay. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the OECD Vietnam Investment Forum 2023. Diễn đàn của chúng ta hôm nay trân trọng được chào đón. We have the honor to introduce the esteemed leaders and distinguished guests. Ngài Nguyễn Chí Dũng, Bộ trưởng Bộ Kế hoạch và Đầu tư. His Excellency Mr. Nguyễn Chí Dũng, Minister of Planning and Investment. Ngài Matthias Cormann, Tổng thư ký OECD, Mr. Matthias Cormann, OECD Secretary General. Bà Nguyễn Minh Hằng, Thứ trưởng Bộ Ngoại giao Việt Nam, Ma'am Her Excellency Nguyễn Minh Hằng, Deputy Foreign Minister. Diễn đàn còn có sự tham dự của các lãnh đạo các địa phương Việt Nam, trưởng đoàn, đại sứ, quan chức cao cấp, đại diện các tổ chức quốc tế và khu vực, các viện nghiên cứu và cộng đồng doanh nghiệp các nước OECD và Đông Nam Á. The forum also welcomes the participation of leaders of Vietnam localities, heads of delegations, excellencies, ambassadors, senior officials, representatives of international and regional organizations, research institutes, business communities from OECD and Southeast Asia countries. Để mở đầu chương trình, xin kính mời các quý vị đại biểu hướng lên màn hình để theo dõi clip giới thiệu về môi trường đầu tư của Việt Nam. To begin with, I would like to invite all distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, to direct your attention to the screen for a briefing video clip about Vietnam investment environment.
Vietnam, the third largest economy in Southeast Asia, with a GDP of over $400 billion, is among the world's top 20 FDI destinations and top 20 international traders. The country, with the success story in development path and foreign investment attraction in the past 35 years, is transforming into an attractive and safe destination, a dynamic and potential market, a destination for investors' success. Vietnam is one of the few economies with positive growth during the COVID-19 pandemic period. Last year, Vietnam's GDP reached a record growth rate of 8.02%. FDI attraction surpassed $29 billion with actual invested capital of over $22 billion, a 13% year-on-year increase. Trade volume stood at $732 billion, up by 9%. In the first half of 2023, greenfield investment in Vietnam increased by nearly 72%, with newly registered capital rose by 31% over the same period last year. With the ambitious commitment of net zero carbon emission target by 2050, Vietnam is effectively implementing the National Green Growth Strategy, boosting economic restructuring with regards to new growth innovation models, environment-friendly, social fairness, and sustainable development. The potential for cooperation in green growth, digital economy, circular economy, knowledge economy, science and technology, and innovation is rapidly expanding. Vietnam, with its strategic geographical position, is located in the heart of Southeast Asia, a dynamic development region. It only takes 1 to 5 hours to fly from Hanoi, the capital city, or Ho Chi Minh City, the nation's economic hub, to Bangkok, Singapore, Beijing, Seoul, Tokyo. Social, political, and macroeconomic stability are well maintained. The economy, with 100 million people, has steadily grown at 6 to 7% in the past 2 decades. Rising global status. Vietnam has strategic partnerships with 17 countries, including big ones within G7 and G20. Previously, the country well performed the role of ASEAN chair, the 41st ASEAN Interparliamentary Assembly (IPA) President in 2020 and non-permanent member of the United Nations Security Council for the 2020-2021 term. Dynamic economic reform. For deeper integration into the global value and supply chains, Vietnam is accelerating its institutional reform, improving its business environment and national competitiveness. During the 2016-2020 period, Vietnam's business environment ranking, according to the World Bank, increased by 20 places. The country is one of the 2 Asian countries with long-term credit ratings at stable and positive, according to Moody's and S&P. Nikkei Asia assessed Vietnam has been leading Southeast Asia in terms of recovery after the COVID-19 pandemic and ranked 8th in the world. The country's happiness index also increased by 12 ranks from 77 in 2022 to 65 in 2023, according to the United Nations. Last year, Vietnam was the 3rd most attractive investment destinations in the world and the 2nd in Asia, according to Japanese JETRO survey, being in top 5 most attractive investment destinations in the world, according to Eurocham survey. According to the Global Business Environment Rankings by EIU of the Economist Group, Vietnam's economy has the biggest growth driver and the most significant improvement in business performance, 12 places higher than the same period last year. Innovation. Making good use of internal resources for rapid and sustainable development on the basis of science and technology, innovation and digital economy transformation is a cross-cutting point in the socio-economic development plan and strategy for the 2021-2030 period. Last year, Vietnam's Global Innovation Index ranked 48th out of 132, up by 20 places in the last decade and ranked 3rd in the ASEAN, according to WIPO. The National Innovation Center was established to promote the business ecosystem development and attract large innovation companies to bring in, incubate new technologies for the Vietnamese business community with the purpose of becoming the regional hub for science and technology. Infrastructure pillar. Vietnam is focusing its investment efforts on many large-scale transport and urban infrastructure projects, including North-South Expressway, airports, seaports, coastline roads, urban transport. Among these, Long Thanh International Airport near Ho Chi Minh City is planned to become one of the new hubs for air transshipment in the region. Tremendous efforts are also being made on the expressway system with the expectation that by 2025, the North-South Expressway, with a total length of 1,814 kilometers, will be completed, and in the next 10 years, the country will have 5,000 kilometers of expressway. Workforce. Being the 15th most populous country in the world and 3rd in Southeast Asia, Vietnam is currently in a golden population period with over 60% of the population in the working age, while the rapidly growing middle class will reach 50% of the population in 10 years. The country is strongly reforming its education sector, including school education, university, and vocational training, to develop its workforce. Integration. Vietnam is working hard in its global integration effort, acting as a responsible partner in the global community. Besides the ASEAN regional market of over 650 million people, Vietnam has joined 16 free trade agreements with 60 economies in all leading economic and political centers, including 15 G20 members, welcoming the next investment wave. To get well prepared for the waves of investment worldwide, Vietnam has been improving the business environment, developing infrastructure and industrial zones, skillful human resources, planning more power projects, especially renewable energy, prioritizing supporting industries development and administrative reform. The Vietnamese government has also formed a special working group to deal with difficulties that businesses facing, simultaneously implementing institutional reform, creating a more transparent and favorable business environment. Many incentive policies have been issued to attract large-scale projects using advanced technology, generating additional values and boosting linkages with global value chains. Seizing the opportunities and staying ahead of the global trend, together we are shaping a prosperous and sustainable future. Welcome to Vietnam, a safe and attractive destination for your success.
Tiếp theo chương trình, xin trân trọng kính mời ngài Nguyễn Chí Dũng, Bộ trưởng Bộ Kế hoạch và Đầu tư Việt Nam phát biểu khai mạc diễn đàn. Now I have the honor to invite His Excellency Nguyễn Chí Dũng, Minister of Planning and Investment of Vietnam, to deliver his opening remark.
Thưa ngài Matthias Goreman, Tổng thư ký Tổ chức Hợp tác và Phát triển Kinh tế OECD. Thưa tất cả các vị khách quý, chuyên gia, các vị đại biểu. Trước hết, cho phép tôi cảm ơn OECD đã tổ chức diễn đàn đầu tư Việt Nam OECD ngày hôm nay. Đây là lần đầu tiên diễn đàn được OECD tổ chức tại Việt Nam, đã cho thấy sự quan tâm của cộng đồng quốc tế đối với cả môi trường đầu tư tại Việt Nam. Đặc biệt là với chủ đề đẩy mạnh thu hút đầu tư chất lượng cao, phục vụ tăng trưởng xanh, thông minh và bền vững. Có thể nói đây là một cơ hội để chúng ta cùng nhau trao đổi thẳng thắn và đề xuất những cái giải pháp thiết thực để nâng cao hiệu quả hợp tác, thu hút đầu tư nước ngoài chất lượng cao, hướng đến sự phát triển thịnh vượng và bền vững. Thưa quý vị đại biểu, như chúng ta đều chứng kiến thì tình hình thế giới vừa qua đã tiếp tục biến động nhanh chóng, phức tạp, khó lường. Và kinh tế toàn cầu thì tăng trưởng chậm lại, hoạt động sản xuất kinh doanh, nhu cầu tiêu dùng thì giảm sút, rủi ro suy thoái kinh tế tiềm ẩn, tình trạng lạm phát gia tăng, xu hướng thắt chặt chính sách tiền tệ và tăng lãi suất tiếp tục kéo dài ở nhiều quốc gia. Cạnh tranh chiến lược, các vấn đề an ninh năng lượng, an ninh lương thực, thiên tai, dịch bệnh, biến đổi khí hậu diễn biến phức tạp đã tác động mạnh đến làn sóng đầu tư và ảnh hưởng đến phát triển kinh tế xã hội toàn cầu. Tuy phải đối mặt với nhiều khó khăn và thách thức chưa có tiền lệ, nhưng với sự chỉ đạo, điều hành chủ động, linh hoạt và quyết liệt của Chính phủ, Thủ tướng Chính phủ và được sự hỗ trợ đồng hành của cộng đồng quốc tế, trong đó có OECD, Việt Nam đã ban hành nhiều chính sách kịp thời và hiệu quả để ứng phó với diễn biến của tình hình, tiếp tục đẩy mạnh phục hồi và phát triển kinh tế xã hội, như triển khai đồng bộ và kịp thời các cái chính sách tài khóa kết hợp với cả chính sách tiền tệ linh hoạt và phù hợp, và các cái chính sách vĩ mô khác để hỗ trợ nền kinh tế, giảm chi phí cho doanh nghiệp và người dân, kiểm soát lạm phát, giữ vững ổn định kinh tế vĩ mô, đảm bảo các cân đối lớn của nền kinh tế, tháo gỡ kịp thời các cái vướng mắc về thủ tục pháp lý trong lĩnh vực bất động sản, hỗ trợ khôi phục thị trường du lịch, ban hành các chính sách tín dụng ưu đãi nhằm tiết giảm các cái chi phí và hạ lãi suất vay vốn, vân vân. Đây là những tiền đề căn bản để giúp Việt Nam đạt được những kết quả khả quan trong phát triển kinh tế xã hội thời gian vừa qua. Cụ thể là trong 9 tháng năm 2023 thì kinh tế vĩ mô của Việt Nam tiếp tục ổn định, lạm phát được kiểm soát và các cân đối lớn của nền kinh tế thì được bảo đảm. Tăng trưởng GDP của 9 tháng đạt 4,24%. Đây là một mức tăng khá so với bối cảnh chung của thế giới và khu vực hiện nay. Thị trường tiền tệ thì cơ bản ổn định, tỷ giá thì được điều hành linh hoạt, phù hợp với cả diễn biến của thị trường. Mặt bằng lãi suất đã giảm mạnh, vừa giúp kiểm soát lạm phát, vừa đáp ứng yêu cầu tín dụng của nền kinh tế, bảo đảm an toàn và thanh khoản của hệ thống ngân hàng. Xuất siêu 21,6 tỷ đô la Mỹ, Vốn đầu tư nước ngoài đăng ký tăng 7,7% so với cùng kỳ. Vốn FDI thực hiện trong năm 2022 cũng cao nhất trong 5 năm vừa qua. Với những kết quả tích cực nêu trên thì vị trí của Việt Nam trên các bảng xếp hạng đã có những bước tiến bộ đáng kể. Nhiều tổ chức uy tín quốc tế đã đánh giá cao kết quả và triển vọng phát triển kinh tế và nâng hạng tín nhiệm. Nhiều tập đoàn công nghệ lớn đã tìm hiểu môi trường đầu tư kinh doanh tại Việt Nam, phản ánh các nhà đầu tư nước ngoài đang đặt niềm tin và triển vọng tăng trưởng cũng như môi trường đầu tư và vị thế kinh tế của Việt Nam. Các tập đoàn kinh tế nước ngoài nhìn nhận Việt Nam đang có nhiều cơ hội trở thành trung tâm trong chuỗi cung ứng toàn cầu, và cộng đồng quốc tế cũng đánh giá cao Việt Nam đóng vai trò quan trọng trong thúc đẩy thương mại toàn cầu và cam kết mở rộng đầu tư tại Việt Nam trong thời gian tới. Thưa quý vị đại biểu, Việt Nam là một nước đang phát triển, nền kinh tế đang trong quá trình chuyển đổi. Quy mô đang còn khiêm tốn nhưng có một cái độ mở lớn nên dễ bị tác động trước các cái biến động của tình hình thế giới. Tuy nhiên thì Việt Nam đang bước vào một giai đoạn phát triển mới, mở ra nhiều các cơ hội nhưng đồng thời cũng nhiều thách thức. Vì vậy chúng ta cần phải đổi mới tư duy, đổi mới cách nghĩ cách làm, nâng cao năng lực để vượt qua các thách thức, nắm bắt cơ hội, biến nguy thành cơ, từng bước phục hồi và lấy lại đà tăng trưởng. Sau đó thì quan điểm của Việt Nam là phát triển bao trùm, nhanh, bền vững, tập trung thúc đẩy cơ cấu lại nền kinh tế, gắn với đổi mới mô hình tăng trưởng, hướng tới hiện thực hóa các mục tiêu trung hòa carbon vào năm 2050 và phát triển nền kinh tế xanh, bền vững. Trong giai đoạn tới, Việt Nam quyết tâm xây dựng nền kinh tế độc lập, tự chủ, gắn với tích cực, chủ động hội nhập quốc tế sâu rộng, toàn diện, thực chất và hiệu quả. Lấy nội lực là cơ bản, là chiến lược, quyết định, lâu dài, ngoại lực là quan trọng và đột phá. Đồng thời đẩy mạnh triển khai 3 đột phá chiến lược về thể chế, hạ tầng và nguồn nhân lực, thúc đẩy phát triển dựa trên khoa học công nghệ, đổi mới sáng tạo và văn hóa con người Việt Nam. Để thực hiện các mục tiêu nêu trên, thì khu vực đầu tư nước ngoài và sự hỗ trợ của các đối tác tổ chức quốc tế như OECD sẽ đóng vai trò hết sức quan trọng. Đặc biệt, đối với các mục tiêu phát triển bền vững đã đề ra, thì Việt Nam nhận thức rằng đây là một thách thức lớn, song là hướng phát triển tất yếu, đòi hỏi nguồn lực và chiến lược phát triển mang tính chất đột phá. Tuy nhiên, đây cũng là vấn đề mang tính chất toàn cầu. Vì vậy, cần phải có sự hỗ trợ và tham gia tích cực của cộng đồng quốc tế trong suốt quá trình triển khai. Và theo đó thì chúng tôi mong muốn các tổ chức quốc tế và trong đó có OECD cùng với các nhà đầu tư nước ngoài tiếp tục hợp tác, hỗ trợ, đồng hành cùng Việt Nam trong việc tham vấn, đề xuất các chính sách và ý tưởng đầu tư mới, chuyển giao các giải pháp và công nghệ hiện đại, mô hình kinh tế mới, thu hút nguồn vốn đầu tư, hỗ trợ phát triển các quỹ đầu tư, các định chế tài chính và đặc biệt là các tập đoàn đa quốc gia. Về đầu tư nước ngoài, với chủ trương hợp tác và thu hút đầu tư nước ngoài có chọn lọc, lấy chất lượng, hiệu quả, công nghệ, bảo vệ môi trường là tiêu chí đánh giá ưu tiên và chủ yếu. Việt Nam ưu tiên thu hút các dự án đầu tư thuộc các ngành lĩnh vực như khoa học công nghệ, đổi mới sáng tạo, nghiên cứu phát triển, kinh tế xanh, kinh tế số, kinh tế tuần hoàn, kinh tế tri thức, linh kiện điện tử, ô tô điện, sản xuất chất bán dẫn, năng lượng mới, năng lượng tái tạo, trung tâm tài chính xanh, công nghệ sinh học, y tế, v.v. Tại các phiên thảo luận tại diễn đàn với sự tham dự của các đại diện cơ quan ngoại giao, hiệp hội, cộng đồng doanh nghiệp và đặc biệt là các chuyên gia hàng đầu của OECD, tôi mong muốn chúng ta sẽ cùng nhau trao đổi để tìm ra các cái giải pháp nhằm tiếp tục cải thiện môi trường đầu tư, nâng cao chất lượng, hiệu quả dòng vốn đầu tư nước ngoài theo hướng bền vững, đóng góp cho sự phát triển kinh tế xã hội của Việt Nam trong giai đoạn mới. Cụ thể là cần tập trung vào một số cái nội dung chủ yếu như sau. Thứ nhất là đánh giá nhận định về bối cảnh, dự báo về xu hướng trên thế giới. Từ đó thì có những nhận diện rõ những cơ hội mới cho Việt Nam cũng như những thách thức cần phải giải quyết. Thứ hai là trao đổi về thực trạng môi trường đầu tư của Việt Nam, những khó khăn vướng mắc trong triển khai các hoạt động sản xuất kinh doanh, cả về cơ chế chính sách cũng như trong triển khai thực hiện. Từ đó thì đề xuất các cái giải pháp hữu hiệu phù hợp với cả cải thiện nhanh chóng triệt để những cái khó khăn tồn tại cũng như tạo điều kiện cho làn sóng đầu tư mới, đặc biệt là đầu tư trong lĩnh vực phát triển xanh, thông minh và bền vững. Thứ ba, tham vấn OECD về một số giải pháp nhằm nâng cao năng lực cạnh tranh của môi trường đầu tư Việt Nam trong bối cảnh hiện nay, góp phần đưa Việt Nam tham gia sâu hơn vào chuỗi giá trị và trật tự cấu trúc đầu tư mới. Về phía Bộ Kế hoạch Đầu tư thì chúng tôi cam kết sẽ luôn đồng hành, hỗ trợ, tạo mọi điều kiện thuận lợi cho các nhà đầu tư nước ngoài đầu tư kinh doanh hiệu quả, bền vững tại Việt Nam. Thưa quý vị, nhân dịp này tôi cũng xin trân trọng thông báo rằng là ngày mai 28 tháng 10 năm 2023 thì Bộ Kế hoạch và Đầu tư sẽ tổ chức lễ khánh thành Trung tâm Đổi mới sáng tạo quốc gia và khai mạc triển lãm đổi mới sáng tạo Việt Nam năm 2023 tại khu công nghệ cao Hòa Lạc, với sự tham dự của Thủ tướng Chính phủ Phạm Minh Chính cùng đông đảo đại diện cộng đồng, các nhà khoa học, các chuyên gia trí thức, rồi là doanh nghiệp, tổ chức quốc tế trong và ngoài nước, vân vân. Theo đó thì tôi cũng xin trân trọng kính mời tất cả các quý vị dành thời gian tham dự cái buổi lễ và các hoạt động trong triển lãm tại đây, và cũng như là các cái phiên thảo luận chuyên đề về khoa học công nghệ, đổi mới sáng tạo bên lề của sự kiện. Chúng tôi có 12 cái hội thảo ở bên lề cái sự kiện này hết sức quan trọng trong các ngành bán dẫn, y tế, rồi năng lượng, rất nhiều các cái hội thảo với các cái chủ đề rất là quan trọng hiện nay. Rất mong được các quý vị dành thời gian tham dự. Một lần nữa cho phép tôi được chúc Diễn đàn Đầu tư Việt Nam OECD 2023 thành công tốt đẹp. Chúc các quý vị đại biểu sức khỏe, hạnh phúc và thành công. Xin trân trọng cảm ơn.
Xin trân trọng cảm ơn Bộ trưởng Nguyễn Chí Dũng. Thank you, Excellency. Tiếp theo, xin trân trọng kính mời ngài Matthias Cormann, Tổng thư ký OECD lên phát biểu. Next, I have the honor to invite Mr. Matthias Cormann, OECD Secretary General, to deliver his remark.
Dear Minister Nguyen Chi Dung, distinguished guests, colleagues, friends all, thank you again for the very warm welcome to Hanoi and for the opportunity to discuss some of the future directions for investment and investment policy here in Vietnam. This OECD Vietnam Economic Forum will build on our region-wide discussions on investment at yesterday's Southeast Asia Regional Program Ministerial meeting. It will also build on the long-standing OECD-Vietnam partnership in areas such as tax, corporate governance, green growth, and of course, investment, with the first OECD investment policy review of Vietnam having been completed all the way back in 2007. Vietnam's has been an incredibly impressive development trajectory. Between its first major reforms opening up its economy under Doi Moi in 1986 and 2019, the economy grew by a very impressive average of 6.8% per year. Vietnam's trade to GDP ratio is almost 200%, one of the highest in the world. And as I mentioned yesterday, Vietnam was the only large ASEAN economy and one of the very few economies in the world to grow in 2020 at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. We expect Vietnam's GDP to grow by a very strong 6.5% this year and 6.6% next year. And of course, foreign investment has helped significantly to drive this growth performance. Vietnam has been able to sustain high inflows of foreign direct investment over the past decade at a time when global investment flows have actually fallen relative to GDP. In Southeast Asia, Vietnam ranked third in terms of cumulative inflows of foreign direct investment between 2013 and 2022. The OECD Vietnam Action Plan builds on this strong track record and supports the implementation of Vietnam's ambitious socio-economic development strategy, focusing on three key areas. First, further improving the business climate. Vietnam could unlock significant levels of additional new investment by reducing its foreign direct investment restrictiveness, which is currently estimated to be twice the OECD average. It could unleash the forces of competition by bringing regulatory barriers to competition down in line with the OECD average as measured by our Product Market Regulation Index. And it could bring down the cost while improving the availability of services such as telecommunications by further opening up its services sector to foreign trade. There are also opportunities to boost competition in sectors covered by state-owned enterprises. The number of state-owned enterprises has dropped significantly since 1990, but they still account for 1/3 of GDP and are dominant in network sectors. Increasing their efficiency and leveling the playing field with the private sector will be key to delivering the best possible outcomes for consumers and to help sustain growth more broadly. The OECD's guidelines on the corporate governance of state-owned enterprises provide practical advice on achieving these objectives, including with respect to financial supervision and performance management for these businesses. Second, reforms to maximize the contribution of investments to productivity, equal opportunities, and Vietnam's digital and green transitions. The OECD's Foreign Direct Investment Qualities Review will help identify priorities for these reforms. It will facilitate intergovernmental coordination on investment policy and support Vietnam's 2021-2030 National Strategy on Foreign Investment Cooperation. Scaling up investment in clean energy will be particularly critical to meet Vietnam's sustainability objectives. Each year, $16 billion US will be required to meet the latest Power Development Plan 8 by 2030, more than double the levels that are being achieved today. The right policy incentives will help make up the significant gap in sustainable financing. Currently, renewable sources only account for 20% of Vietnam's energy foreign direct investment stock, so there is a lot of opportunity to improve on that. The OECD's Clean Energy Finance and Investment Mobilization Program has identified a number of long-term policy tools for Vietnam to help bridge this gap, including developing project pipelines with a medium to long-term perspective and enhancing the independence of the electrical system operator. Third, implementing tax reforms aligned with global standards. The OECD is assisting Vietnam in implementing the new global minimum tax under the OECD G20 inclusive framework. It will help achieve a balance between attracting quality investments, protecting the tax base, and boosting domestic resource mobilization. This also presents Vietnam with an opportunity to review its tax incentives and identify opportunities to enhance their effectiveness in achieving their underlying policy objectives. As always, I very much look forward to our discussions this morning about opportunities to carry forward our work across those three policy areas and more broadly to increase alignment with OECD work and standards to help optimize the extraordinary investment opportunities for Vietnam. Thank you so much for the opportunity to say a few words. Thank you.
Xin cảm ơn ngài Matthias Cormann. Phiên bế mạc đến đây là kết thúc. Xin trân trọng cảm ơn các quý vị đại biểu, các vị khách quý. Thank you, Mr. Matthias Cormann. The opening session has now come to an end. Kính thưa các quý vị đại biểu, các vị khách quý, tiếp theo chương trình là phiên thảo luận về thu hút đầu tư bền vững và chất lượng tại Việt Nam. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, next is the discussion session on promoting quality and sustainable investment in Vietnam, a deep dive. Xin trân trọng kính mời ông Carmine Di Noa, trưởng ban doanh nghiệp và tài chính OECD, ông Fares Al-Houssami, trưởng nhóm FDI, phòng đầu tư OECD, ông Đỗ Nhật Hoàng, Cục trưởng Cục Đầu tư nước ngoài, Bộ Kế hoạch và Đầu tư Việt Nam, ông Brandon Pearson, đại sứ trưởng phái đoàn Australia tại OECD, tiến sĩ Cấn Văn Lực, kinh tế trưởng, Ngân hàng Đầu tư và Phát triển Việt Nam, ông Hong Sun, Chủ tịch Hiệp hội Doanh nghiệp Hàn Quốc tại Việt Nam, lên sân khấu. Next, I'd like to introduce the distinguished chair and panelist of the session, Mr. Carmine Di Noa, Director for Financial and Enterprise Affairs Directorate of OECD, Mr. Fares Al-Houssami, FDI Qualities Lead, OECD Investment Division, Mr. Đỗ Nhật Hoàng, Director General of the Foreign Investment Agency, Ministry of Planning and Investment of Vietnam, His Excellency Mr. Brandon Pearson, Ambassador, Permanent Representative of Australia to OECD, Dr. Cấn Văn Lực, Chief Economist, Bank of Investment and Development of Vietnam, and Mr. Hong Sun, Chair of COCHAM in Vietnam. Trân trọng kính mời ông Carmine Di Noa điều hành phiên thảo luận, and I would like to introduce the chair of the session, Mr. Carmine Di Noa.
So good morning, Xin Chào, and welcome to session one on quality and sustainable investment in Vietnam. I'm Carmine Di Noa. I'm the director for the Financial Enterprise Affairs at the OECD, and I have the great pleasure to moderating today's session. As was mentioned, yesterday, today, and again this morning by Secretary General of the OECD, Vietnam has made, important, huge steps towards greater investment openness that led to an impressive surge in FDI, and I have to say that the video was quite impressive. And the investment policy review of Vietnam highlighted by the OECD highlighted this success. Now, beyond quantity, new sustainable trends and standards are impacting and shaping the global investment landscape. So advancing reforms to attract quality investments is becoming essential to boost inclusive growth, productivity, innovation, and support the digital and green transitions. Now, this session will focus on how Vietnam and Southeast Asia can respond to these changes to attract investment that contributes to SDGs and to realizing national socioeconomic strategies. So including actually the for Vietnam, the 2021-2030 National Strategy on Foreign Investment Cooperation. And in this context, actually, we're glad to start an FDI qualities review of Vietnam. So I'm pleased to moderate this important discussion with such distinguished speakers. So we have Mr. Hoan is Director General of the Foreign Investment Agency within the Ministry of Planning and Investment. And the agency is actually our counterpart in the FDI qualities review project. Ambassador Brandon Pearson is an Australian ambassador to the OECD and the co-chair of the OECD Southeast Asia Regional Program. Dr. Cam Van Look is the chief economist of the Bank for Investment and Development of Vietnam and a member of the National Fiscal and Monetary Policy Advisory Council. Mr. Hong Soon is the chairman of the Korean Chamber of Business in Vietnam, KOCHAM. And Mr. Fares Al-Hussami, who leads the OECD work on FDI qualities within DAF, the directorate I'm heading. So I see that this is not really a very much gender balanced panel, but I guess that Fares, often people, I was living in the States, thought that Carmine is a female name, so maybe you should may have misunderstood this, but okay, so apology for that. So we will start with a presentation from OECD on FDI Qualities Initiative and our forthcoming cooperation with Vietnam. So we will then have a panel discussion followed by a Q&A session. So I think, Fares, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Dear distinguished guests, good morning, and many thanks to the host for facilitating this important discussion. Yesterday's intervention and this morning clearly demonstrated that attracting sustainable and quality investment is not an option any longer, but a priority to help address global challenges that all countries are confronted to in some way or another. Inequalities have been exacerbated, leading to a perception of inadequacy in the design of the global economy, weakening open trade and investment rules. The urgency to act against climate change has become ever more apparent. All economies are experiencing some impact of climate change. And foreign investment is declining, as panel A shows here on this slide, while it is actually expected to do a lot of the heavy lifting to finance the Sustainable Development Goals. Our OECD FDI statistics show that in 2022 alone, global FDI flows dropped by 24%. Now, Vietnam and the region are weathering much better these fluctuations, as we heard previously. And here, panel B shows that FDI inflows in percent of GDP are stagnating, but they are still at much higher levels compared to the rest of the world. And Vietnam has actually been capturing an increased share of the FDI going to Southeast Asia, except in recent years. But beyond quantity, Vietnam is definitely in a position where it can also focus on the quality and sustainability of FDI. That's the spirit of Vietnam's Socioeconomic Development Plan and the National Strategy on Foreign Investment Cooperation. And the OECD launched in 2018 the FDI Qualities Initiative that we want to leverage to support Vietnam in achieving these national objectives. The initiative provides government with the policies, the data, the expertise they need to encourage sustainable investment. And this includes mostly two key tools, indicators and policy toolkit. Our FDI qualities indicators measure the impact of investment across countries and across four key areas of the Sustainable Development Goals, namely job quality and skills, productivity, innovation, and of course, digitalization, gender equality, and last but not least, decarbonization or the green transition. And the policy toolkit helps government identify concrete priorities for reforms to attract sustainable investment in these four key areas. It is grounded in the principles of open, transparent, and non-discriminatory investment policies. And the toolkit complements an OECD recommendation adopted at the ministerial level that represents the first government-backed standard, international standard, on how to enhance the contribution of foreign investment to the SDGs. Of course, job creation is one key outcome that policymakers they expect from FDI. And our FDI qualities indicators, they show that greenfield FDI creates on average 260,000 direct jobs every year in Southeast Asia. 90,000 of them are in Vietnam only, which represent nearly 35%. Quite impressive number. Now, not all investments, they create the same number of jobs. And panel A shows that Southeast Asian countries with competitive industries have high job creation intensities and much more than in OECD, where FDI is concentrated in high-tech or knowledge-intensive services. But this is changing. This is changing also, as mentioned earlier in the welcoming remarks, and as panel B shows here. The labor intensity of FDI in Vietnam, which is the red line here, is declining, is gradually declining, signaling a shift towards higher skilled and quality job creation. And recently, companies such as Samsung or Intel are increasing or expected to increase their investment in industries such as the semiconductors, where Vietnam has a growing role in the global supply chain. Importantly, this structural shift that we are witnessing in Vietnam would need to be accompanied with adequate measures to ensure that the activities of multinationals lead not only to productivity gains, but also that these productivity gains are shared with society. Figures A and B respectively show that foreign firms, which are the red dots here, these foreign firms in Vietnam in particular, but also in general, they are more likely to spend on research and development and provide on-the-job training to their workers than domestic firms do, which is represented by the blue dot. And innovation, upskilling, reskilling are inevitable for multinationals facing fierce global competition, and policies to nurturing skills, particularly the digital skills, is a key priority. But our indicators, our FDI quality indicators, they also shows that some economies and some segments of the population benefit less than others from FDI. For instance, figure C here reveals that foreign firms are less likely to have a female top manager, whether in Vietnam, but also actually in the OECD countries. And extremely importantly, investment also plays and is playing a growing fundamental role in supporting the green transition. FDI is shifting to clean energy in Southeast Asia, but with wide variations across countries. And figure A here shows that renewables represent now 20% of Vietnam's energy FDI stock. This is 50%, around 50% in the OECD. So there is room for growth in Vietnam, and the market condition will allow for this with the right incentives. And as said earlier, twice the actual levels of investment are required to meet Vietnam's energy sustainability goals. Importantly, I would like to highlight that FDI in renewables now, according to our indicators, they create more jobs than FDI in fossil fuels, which highlights that FDI not only can support the green transition, but it can also support a just transition. And figure B here, which I particularly like, it shows that even if in Vietnam, companies' carbon footprint is relatively high, the carbon footprint of foreign firms in Vietnam is actually lower than that of domestic firms, particularly in the energy sector and in manufacturing, and in contrast with the region where FDI benefits in terms of the carbon footprint are less clear-cut. Now, what could Vietnam do to even further ensure that the benefits of FDI go to all segments of the population and support inclusive growth and a digital and green transition? The OECD's FDI qualities standards include 5 key principles shown here, all backed with a checklist of good practices that policymakers can use for benchmarking. The principles provide concrete direction on how to align investment with other strategies and policies by improving policy coherence and breaking institutional silos. We cannot imagine investment policy and environmental policy in isolation if we want to achieve the benefit of FDI in terms of the green transition, for instance. And the principles also cover how domestic legislation can meet international sustainability standards, including through new regional and bilateral investment and trade agreements. There is also a lot of talk about new industrial policy. Our principles recommend targeted technical and financial support to develop domestic capabilities or SMEs capabilities that help FDI technology spillovers. And here, tax incentives should target specific goals such as green and digital activities. And in all this, investment promotion agencies are key players, including by supporting corporate disclosure of social and environmental risk, help investors communicate the responsible practices, and enable due diligence in supply chains. We are therefore very glad to partner with the Foreign Investment Agency of Vietnam to implement FDI qualities. And our discussion today is an important first step in this direction. Let me conclude that FDI qualities is not only about indicators or analysis, but it's also a process of engaging closely with stakeholders on the ground, as we recently did with the Chilean or Irish government, helping them undertake key reforms. We very much hope the same with Vietnam, and we hope that this FDI quality review of Vietnam will pave the way for other FDI quality reviews in other Southeast Asian countries. And as the investment policy review of Vietnam in 2007, if I'm not mistaken, was the first in the region, the FDI quality review of Vietnam will be also the first in the region. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Faris. We're a bit slightly over time because we started late. So, I mean, there is a coffee break then. If we keep the audience awake, we can maybe get some time there, some flexibility. But no, so let's try to keep it short. But now, okay, our discussion basically, these are very important data, and especially again in terms of the quality and the work that we are doing, but very also striking in some cases. So I think in this debate, we want to, in a sense, help guiding the work on FDI qualities to ensure that it's relevant and aligned with national, Vietnam priorities. So we will start with a question which will be the same for everyone. So what are basically the key challenges that you see and opportunities to attract quality FDI in Vietnam and Southeast Asia, but in particular Vietnam? And so what are the main reform priorities? So maybe we start with Director General Hoang, and then let's try to keep it in possibly in 4 minutes, and then we do the first round. Please, Director General.
Kính thưa các quý vị, hôm nay chủ đề chúng ta về cái thu hút đầu tư có chất lượng. Thế thì Việt Nam cũng đã có những chính sách thu hút đầu tư có chất lượng. Và trong cái bài trình bày của Bộ trưởng cũng đã nói những cái nội dung cơ bản những chủ trương này, cũng như trong clip của chúng tôi cũng đã có cái thông tin. Thế thì chúng tôi chỉ xin có một số cái ý tưởng thế này. Việt Nam là đi sau, cho nên chúng tôi phải có những cái cách đi nó đột phá hơn. Cho nên là trong cái chiến lược của chúng tôi là hướng đến các cái dự án có cái hàm lượng công nghệ cao, có cái giá trị gia tăng cao, có cái tính lan tỏa trong nước và nước ngoài. Và thứ hai là chủ trương của chúng tôi là lấy trong nước làm nền tảng, nước ngoài là quan trọng. Cho nên là cái thu hút đầu tư nước ngoài để cùng với cả cái đầu tư trong nước để có sự liên kết, để mà hai khối đầu tư nước ngoài và trong nước cùng hợp tác với nhau, cùng liên kết với nhau để cùng phát triển. Win-win. Đấy, và trên tinh thần đó để mà đạt được thì chúng tôi cũng phải có những cái giải pháp. Ví dụ trong thời gian qua, Việt Nam đã có rất nhiều các giải pháp để ổn định kinh tế vĩ mô, rồi cải thiện môi trường đầu tư, đấy, rồi là thực hiện 3 đột phá chiến lược về hạ tầng, về đào tạo nguồn nhân lực, cũng như là cải cách thể chế. Và đặc biệt là chúng tôi đang rất là tập trung vào cải cách cái thủ tục hành chính để cho các nhà đầu tư đến Việt Nam thuận lợi, và cũng như là các nhà đầu tư hiện hành đầu tư kinh doanh có thuận lợi. Theo đó, chúng tôi tăng cường các cái đối thoại với các nhà đầu tư để nắm bắt các khó khăn của nhà đầu tư, để hỗ trợ các nhà đầu tư và để thu hút các cái làn sóng đầu tư có chất lượng cao, đặc biệt là công nghệ cao, thì chúng tôi đang rất chú trọng cái vấn đề về phát triển công nghiệp phụ trợ, tạo thành hệ sinh thái cho các nhà đầu tư nước ngoài đến với Việt Nam để hòa đồng vào hệ sinh thái này, để mà giảm chi phí, giảm cái và để có cái tính cạnh tranh hơn đối với cái sản phẩm hàng hóa của mình. Thì trong cái thời gian tiếp theo thì tôi cũng sẽ có ý kiến thêm. Tôi xin có một số ý kiến ban đầu như vậy.
Thank you. Thank you, Director General and Ambassador Pearson. So challenges and priorities. I think it's important also what you were saying, Director General. I mean, the link obviously in order to improve and to is I mean linking domestic and foreign investment and to reach targets. But please.
Dạ vâng. Về liên quan đến cái thách thức thì nó có hai cái nhóm. Một là của cái thách thức chung của Đông Nam Á và cái thách thức đối Việt Nam. Thách thức của chung ấy, thì là tình hình thế giới vẫn dự báo tiếp tục có những cái biến động. Và thứ hai ấy, là cái việc nâng lãi suất cũng các biện pháp kiềm chế lạm phát nó cũng ảnh hưởng đến cái sự phục hồi phát triển kinh tế, làm nó chậm lại. Cái thứ ba là các tập đoàn đa quốc gia là đang tái cơ cấu các chuỗi sản xuất và thậm chí là đang có cái chủ trương là hạn chế đầu tư ra, quay trở về. Cái thứ tư nữa là cái tính cạnh tranh thu hút đầu tư nước ngoài của các nước rất là mạnh mẽ. Các nước mà không có cái giải pháp kịp thời thì cũng có cái sự tụt hậu. Thứ năm là hiện nay là các nước đang thực hiện các cái cam kết trong OECD về nội luật hóa cái quy định về tối thiểu toàn cầu, cũng làm cho các tập đoàn lớn cũng đang quan sát và chững lại các quyết định đầu tư. Đấy là cái chung. Thế còn đối với Việt Nam, thách thức của chúng tôi thì tuy là chúng tôi cũng trong cái giới thiệu của mình là về cái nguồn nhân lực dồi dào, nhưng chúng tôi cũng thấy rằng một trong những cái mà chúng tôi cần phải nỗ lực hơn nữa đó là đào tạo nguồn nhân lực chất lượng cao. Vì các nhà đầu tư đến Việt Nam là cũng là để tận dụng cái nguồn nhân lực của chúng tôi. Đấy là một trong những cái chúng tôi rất chú trọng. Và thứ hai, đấy là vấn đề chúng tôi đã có nhiều cái cải cách về thủ tục hành chính rồi, nhưng chúng tôi cần phải tăng cường hơn nữa cái việc tiếp tục cải cách môi trường hành chính. Thứ ba đó là liên quan tới như chúng tôi đã nói là cái hệ sinh thái đầu tư, đó là cái công nghiệp phụ trợ rồi logistics, tất cả những cái chi phí phải làm sao cho nó phải giảm xuống hơn nữa để cho các nhà đầu tư có cái khi chuyển dịch về Việt Nam họ thấy Việt Nam nó còn hấp dẫn hơn nữa. Đấy là một số cái mà chúng tôi thấy là cái thách thức chung và cách thức đối với Việt Nam. Vâng.
Thank you, Brandon.
Thank you, Carmina. Look, three things for me, very briefly. The first point, I don't think we have to worry in Southeast Asia about attractiveness of investment. I mean, the numbers, Southeast Asia has contributed about nearly 10% of global growth in the last 10 years. And the investment numbers have tracked that story because, you know, whether it's $1.3 trillion in FDI stock from OECD countries, nearly more than half, 53 or 54% of investment comes from in Southeast Asia comes from the OECD, and Vietnam is a big part of that. Secondly, the geostrategic environment is supportive of investment in Southeast Asia. If you think about semiconductor investment in China, has gone from its share of global semiconductor investment has gone from 48% 5 years ago to 1% last year. If you look at ICT investment in China, it's come down from roughly about between 40 and 60%. If you think about the companies that have moved or downsized their operations in China, there's Stellantis, there's LG, there's Samsung, and I'm sure we'll hear that from my Korean colleague. So there is a diversification going on, and it will benefit Southeast Asia. Thirdly, but there are challenges. And then there was a McKinsey report the other day, last month, and it nominated a number of challenges for Southeast Asia to overcome in the next few years. I'll pick one: energy. In the last 10 years, for example, OECD energy use, primary energy use, that's all of the countries in the OECD, it went up by 0.1% a year over the decade. In Vietnam, the same number was 7.4% per year. Now, it is much harder to decarbonise when your energy use is going up by 7.4 times than the OECD average. So the path to the speed of, and when your energy use per capita is 1/3 of the OECD average. So the trajectory of your energy use is going up at a rate much different to certainly the OECD world. And so the path to carbon neutrality will be harder for Vietnam. And we have to recognise that in the OECD. And you know that, and we also have to recognise that when you're looking around Southeast Asia, the assets, the geographical, the topographical assets. I mean, we in Australia, we're going at 82% of renewables by 2030. But we've got a lot of land. We've got a lot of sun. We're a relatively dispersed population. It's going to be harder, and we in the OECD have to recognise that the path to carbon neutrality, whilst providing energy security, which is essential for investment, will be different. Thank you.
Thank you, Brandon. Very interesting, because also the challenges and then obviously the increasing use in a sense of energy. So other things being equal, as economists say, may make in a sense relatively more difficult decarb and reach some level, some targets. So maybe let's see, Dr. Van Look. So I mean, challenges and reform priorities, please.
Yeah, thank you very much for invitation. I just would like to mention 3 main challenges, externally and also internally. Externally, I think you see, as Mr. Nhật Hoàng has been talking about, we are facing some sort of more uncertainty. What we often say now, VUCA is very, very actual now. And that's why we are facing, let's say, more slowdown in global and even Vietnam economic growth. OECD has pointed out that FDI last year declined 14%. And this year, maybe 4%. And that is the very first challenge. The second challenge, that is, the geopolitics. And that has led to more uncertainty, more insecurity in terms of food, in terms of energy security. And just now, the concern for everyone. Number 3, we talk about the financial markets. This year, we were surprised by some of the bank collapse in the US and then in Switzerland. Meaning what? Meaning that we are facing more risk in terms of financial market, banking market. And if we look at the national debt level, in many developing economies now, it's at the peak. And given the very high rate of interest, I think that's becoming quite risky now and also in the coming future. Number 4, we talk about climate change. This year, you have seen so many unexpected, climate events. Okay, El Nino, all occur at the same time. So these are the 4 external risks. internally, Minister Dung has already mentioned about three key challenges for Vietnam. And we still face those three main challenges. The first one, I talk about the people, human resource. Human resource here, I mean, we, as as the OECD slide have mentioned, we lack a lot of unskilled or high skilled labor force. Especially now we have got a lot of high tech and quality FDI coming in. Okay, Samsung, Intel, Microsoft, Amazon. All right, but how about the skilled labor? Given the innovation, we talked about this morning. And the second one, if we look at the infrastructure domain in Vietnam, it's still a very huge challenge. And that makes the logistic cost in Vietnam still quite high compared to, let's say, ASEAN average. Number three, we talk about the policy. Okay, policy. So in Vietnam, you see, we have been trying to improve our investment, our business policy, but we still face what we call inconsistency and sometimes lack of transparency. And that I have been hearing from investors. So these are three main challenges we need to face. Finally, we talk about green transition this morning. So now Vietnam and many other developing economies now facing that is, okay, on the one hand, we want to reduce, let's say, thermal power. On the other hand, we are facing energy security. So how can we get a good balance, in reducing thermal power, at the same time we can ensure energy security? I think that's not so easy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Very clear, I think, on what are, some of the challenges, and so also that must be tackled in terms of reforms. Actually, you mentioned also issues that are, I would say, quite general and broad also for all countries, OECD and others. And I mean, you mentioned financial markets, the banking collapse. I have to say that just to flag you, I mean, among many other things, this was an amazing failure of the basic corporate governance. I mean, people in those boards have no clue of what's going on. In the afternoon, we will present the G20 OECD principles of corporate governance at the State Securities Commission with also the financial community here. And also another issue we are always dealing at the OECD, discussing with our ambassadors is, I mean, you mentioned obviously after in these years the level of public debt, and this is something to take care, in particular for given the monetary policies around the world, the high level of rates, and the refinancing, I would say, cost for public and especially for corporate debt, which is, I think, an issue. So I think it's interesting now to go to Mr. Sun, also because, obviously Korea, and it was briefly mentioned also by Ambassador Pearson, and he has also a great role in the region and also in the interaction here, very important big company. So how you see, challenges and then priorities for reform for Vietnam, please.
Thank you. Well, as most of you already know, the Korean Chamber, we have almost 10,000 businesses in Vietnam. And among them, recently we have about 1,000 Korean companies investing in the ICT and digital section as well. Where one of the most top the interest of the Korean business in Vietnam is the human resources. In Korea, we are very serious problem of the labor. So the one of the top region that we choose the Vietnam is Vietnam has a very diligent, good quality, well educated labor. And then but we still want to need more like a legal frame to develop the new businesses such as ICT or some high tech and digital. Just Mr. Luke just said, the well-educated labor is not enough for lure more the businesses. And then the Vietnamese Prime Minister, the Pham Minh Chinh, he just mentioned about he wanted to lure more like a semiconductor business in Vietnam. Then we need a legal frame first. And as you see, the Samsung recently invested USA more than $20 billion to build their semiconductor factory. So one of the first most important thing is the security of power. The early of this year, we have a serious problem of power shortage in the northern Vietnam, but we cannot solve this kind of power plant power program in a short time. So we keep asking to Vietnam's government, they need to develop the power security as soon as possible, especially for the semiconductor or high tech. Once they have the blackout, they need a lot of time and money to repair that. So we need the stable energy project in Vietnam. And in Vietnam, the legal frame for the support for the FDI and even the local the industry is not well prepared yet. Since even in Korea or USA, Japan, everybody wanted the new investment from the FDI. The Vietnam was the same, but the developed countries such as Korea and USA and Japan, they have enough the budget to support the FDI. Even in Korea, we have some reshoring company. We can give them the free of the land for the free of charge, and then give them 80% support, financial support, their investments such as. So Vietnam also need a more attractiveness. But recently we have some problem of a couple hundred Korean company in Vietnam. We are worried about the global minimum tax. So far, we could enjoy the some tax incentives from Vietnam government about 13 years. A lot of company, especially for the high-tech companies such as Samsung, LG, and some Korean the semiconductor packaging companies in here. But from the early next year, the global minimum tax will be fair to all over the Korean top in the companies. So those kind of the new obstacles for Korean industry are kind of big concern from now on. So we expect Vietnam government could study more how they could manage between the new international rules such as a global minimum tax and then the new incentives for the new high technology. So in Korean side, we really respect and then we highly appreciate for the Vietnamese the government, especially FIA from Mr. Huang, MPI, Mr. Zung, they have the FDI a lot, but that is not enough for us. So to lure more investment from the international and generally and Korean, the subsidiary, we really wanted to, they need to act a little bit more than now. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Also very interesting. I mean, it's obvious that, I mean, a lot have been, done and achieved, but in order to, let's say, consolidate it, even start even more, we need some issues, legal framework, then obviously global minimum tax. Okay, there is a, it's, at the same time, it's very important to have an harmonized, framework all over the world, and a floor. Then obviously these still may leave some space for some incentives, but I think that obviously this is a very important result that we have achieved. We are achieving because with implementation over the world. Maybe let's go for a second round, maybe more specific. So, Dr. General Huang, I mean, I briefly mentioned, but maybe we can elaborate on the 2021-2030 national strategy on foreign investment cooperation. I mean, these aims at attracting both quantity and quality FDIs, and in particular for high tech and digital economy. So what are maybe the key objectives of the strategy, and what steps have been taken to meet these objectives? Please.
Chúng tôi sau khi chúng tôi tổng kết 30 năm đầu tư nước ngoài năm 2018 thì chúng tôi cũng đã có cái tổng kết đánh giá và báo cáo và có cái sự đóng góp của cộng đồng doanh nghiệp trong nước và nước ngoài và các tổ chức quốc tế, các hiệp hội doanh nghiệp. Trên cơ sở đó chúng tôi đã tham mưu cho chính phủ trình Bộ Chính trị Việt Nam ban hành với nghị quyết là nghị quyết 50 về đầu tư nước ngoài. Theo đó thì cái chiến lược đầu tư nước ngoài sắp tới chúng tôi hướng vào là thu hút đầu tư có chọn lọc, như cái trình bày của Bộ trưởng tôi có nói đấy, lấy chất lượng, hiệu quả, công nghệ, môi trường làm cái tiêu chí ưu tiên và có tính lan tỏa. Thế thì đấy là cái mục tiêu chính. Và cái mục tiêu nữa của chúng tôi thứ hai ấy, là để mở rộng thị trường, thu hút vốn công nghệ, kiến thức và kinh nghiệm quản lý của quốc tế. Bởi vì chúng tôi, các vị biết là đã tham gia vào 16 cái hiệp định thương mại rồi, với tiếp cận với 3/4 dân số thế giới và 2/3 GDP của toàn cầu. Thế thì với các hiệp FTA như vậy thì chúng tôi tiếp cận rất nhiều các thị trường lớn, thì chúng tôi phải mở rộng thị trường, không phải chỉ thu hút đầu tư nước ngoài vào là ở trong nước, mà từ đó để xuất khẩu các hàng hóa đi các nước và hợp tác hai chiều. Thứ ba là nâng cao hiệu quả công tác thu hút và sử dụng các nguồn vốn đầu tư. Và thứ tư là phải có những cái đột phá. Như chúng tôi nói ở phần đầu ấy, là phải hướng vào công nghệ, đổi mới sáng tạo. Và chúng tôi đang triển khai xây dựng cái đề án trung tâm tài chính quốc tế tại Việt Nam. Và với cái nội dung này thì chúng tôi cũng đã được các tổ chức quốc tế đánh giá cao về những cái chiến lược sắp tới và đã đồng hành. Tôi nói ví dụ về công nghệ thì chip bán dẫn là một trong những nội dung rất quan trọng, và trong cái tuyên bố chung của Tổng thống của ông Joe Biden sang Việt Nam thì đã đưa vào trong nội dung đó. Và trung tâm tài chính thì trong các cuộc làm việc với các cơ quan chính phủ Hoa Kỳ cũng đánh giá rất cao và cũng sẽ ủng hộ. Chính phủ Anh cũng ủng hộ. Mà hiện nay chúng tôi cũng đã được sự ủng hộ của City UK, chính phủ Anh. Rất nhiều các cái định chế tài chính lớn cũng đã đồng hành với chúng tôi. Và ngay hôm qua chúng tôi trao đổi với cả văn phòng ngài Tony Blair. Ngài cũng cam kết đồng hành với chúng tôi hai nội dung. Một là định vị Việt Nam, định vị các lĩnh vực và rà soát các rào cản để có những cái improve trên cơ sở đó để mà tiếp cận các tập đoàn lớn với cái network của các tập đoàn lớn của ngài Tony Blair, và có các quỹ chúng tôi tiếp cận các tập đoàn lớn để thu hút đầu tư vào Việt Nam. Và thứ hai là văn phòng Tony Blair cũng cùng với chúng tôi, giúp chúng tôi là để mà tìm các nguồn tài chính để hỗ trợ, để cùng các tổ chức khác, các cơ quan chính phủ để mà hình thành cái trung tâm tài chính. Thế đấy là những cái mục tiêu chính trong cái chiến lược. Tất nhiên có rất nhiều mục tiêu. Đấy. Thế nhưng mà đấy là những mục tiêu chính mà chúng tôi đang hướng tới để mà thu hút đầu tư, cũng như là như tôi nói từ đầu, tôi đi sau thì chúng tôi không đi theo mà chúng tôi phải đột phá. Đấy là một số cái chúng tôi xin chia sẻ. Xin cảm ơn.
Thank you very much. Also, I mean, interesting to see also the openness. I mean, I think the revision in also maybe reviewing restrictions. On the one side, the indexes are quite clear, but on the other side, there are issues that can be improved. And also, as was mentioned this morning, the presence still of a lot of maybe in some cases, maybe the openness is increasing, but maybe the presence of many state-owned enterprise maybe maybe also an issue. Ambassador Pearson, now you are familiar with obviously OECD work and Australian also investment policies. Now, maybe what is really here attractive for, I would say, Australian investment, in particular in topics in high-tech, digital, and green, but also what, I don't know, can be some examples from Australia that can be useful for quality FDI that can benefit Vietnam, and so can be useful in this forum. Please.
Two things. One is the first thing on Australia. There's some things that we must do. I mean, our performance in investment in Southeast Asia has been not particularly great. Our pension funds have not been as active, for example, in Southeast Asia as Canada. And great to see my Canadian colleague from the OECD here. And you can track that. You know, we were going along at around about mid-$25 billion until about the mid-20s, mid-15, around 2015, 2016. And then suddenly Canada's pension funds got much more active and now have a $40 billion bigger stake in Southeast Asia than ours, than the Australian side. So we have underperformed, and part of that is hopefully being rectified by a new report that was released last month, and the government is creating investment deal teams to scour Southeast Asia for investment opportunities and to bring along some of our pension funds to get more involved in Southeast Asia and Vietnam as well. Secondly, homework for Vietnam specifically. You have some of the best critical minerals reserves in the world. We have, frankly, sorry, Madeline, this time, we have the best mining companies in the world. Let's put those two together. So we're a major, and so is Canada, a major rare earths and critical minerals producer. But this is a completely untapped opportunity for Vietnam. And the feedback that I get is that Vietnam approvals processes when it comes to mining are much more onerous than they need to be. There is an amazing opportunity, whether it's across the critical minerals rare earth spectrum for companies, for countries like Vietnam to develop, to supply what is going to be a very, very upward trajectory in demand over the next 30 years to supply the green transition. Finally, just some homework for the OECD. We now have the first applicant for membership from the Southeast Asia. Now we've got a pipeline as well, whether it's Thailand, Vietnam, Malaysia, Philippines. OECD, the Southeast Asia regional program should be like a hothouse. And that's our ambition, and my co-chair, I know, agrees with this, for preparing the pipeline for membership. And in terms of investment, that means the qualities framework, it means the codes of liberalisation, preparing and guiding potential OECD members from Southeast Asia through that process. And it doesn't necessarily mean they end up members. Some countries may not want to become members, but it will help them anyway. It's just understanding that the sort of things that interest, that are those stage points and standards that the OECD has developed for many years will help. And that's homework for the OECD. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Very important points. Also role of pension fund we saw in the video before. It's important, especially when you want to develop, for example, infrastructure. This is a typical asset class where the role of long-term investors can be useful. Obviously, we like competition, but not going to the floor. But so we would like more funds from Australia, not less than from Canada. So it's great to see these lively opportunities. And I think also I would say you made also a practical proposal. Let's say combine two strengths in terms of resources here and also role of Australian mining companies. So Mr. Sun, I would say similar questions for Korean. What is the aspects maybe are attractive for Korean companies here investment in Vietnam in digital green, but also what about it was mentioned already briefly, but other parts, semiconductor, hydrogen industries, and others, please.
Yeah, thank you. Korea is one of the top manufacturer for the semiconductor, and we have a very developed high hydrogen business in Korea. From the Hyundai Motors, we've been developed for the hydrogen for the last 25 years, and then we are the most developed the technology in the hydrogen business as well. So we really wanted to develop the green hydrogen. So far we have a gray hydrogen. It's quite popular all over the world and cheaper, but green hydrogen is very expensive, since we have to using the renewable energies in here. But renewable energy in Vietnam is much more expensive than the Australia or the Middle East, since the land price in Vietnam is way too higher than any other country among the developing company, where such as Australia, you have a lot of embedded in the area in the middle of the Australia, and Canada, you have a huge land. So the Vietnam, the minimum cost for the green hydrogen is quite difficult, but still we regard as one of our top partner is the Vietnam, since the distance between the Korea and Vietnam is quite near, and then we already have 10,000 Korean companies who already invested in Vietnam. So we wanted to develop and using our current members how to make the green hydrogen from Vietnam, and then to get those kind to invest in those kind of business, we still need support from Vietnam. Land prices and all the relevant to the legal frame is not where the preferred yet. So and then the technology wise, still we don't have any green hydrogen deliver the shipment from the Vietnam to any other countries so far. That is a very hard technology for all of us now. So and at the same time, the semiconductor and other high tech and digital, everything is need a lot of the well trained the human resources. That those kind of human resources come from the government, the project to develop the electronics business in the early 1970s. Korea education system, the little bit change it. We opened a lot of new faculty for the electronics. So most of the Samsung's top the management now, they used to study in the 1970s from the new faculty of electronics in Korea. So Vietnam is now a golden population, but this golden population, we don't expect it that time going to be very long from now on. It's only like 15, maximum 20 years. So during the next 15, 20 years, the Vietnam government have to concentrate every resources to develop the human resources, designated the human resources to develop your industry. So we are our FDI, not only Korea, but also all the FDI in Vietnam, we cover almost more than 73% of the Vietnamese export volume. And then we really wanted to have many domestic suppliers, but I don't think Vietnam has so many like very clever, and then one of the top Vietnamese companies. They're more like investing in the real estate business than the manufacturing. The supplying business, support business is a very hard business. The margin, the benefit is very low. It's less than 5%. But whenever you turn to the very good economy, the industry business is really a good engine for the future. Such as Korea, whenever we have a difficulty in 1997 and 2008, even after COVID, the reason the Korea still can go further is because our main business is manufacturing. So we wish the Vietnam government also make a lot of incentive for the small and medium companies to let them develop more and then could prepare for the after golden population is and then for the Korean side, Korean businesses, we focus on those three things. One, the human resources. Second, we need a legal frame for the future businesses. And third is the infrastructure, especially for the energy security. Thanks.
Thank you. And Dr. Van Luque, so I mean, key, I would say, policies and regulations. And so, I mean, you heard also all the other comments that are needed, you know, for Vietnam to achieve, you know, the targets, investment targets, please.
I think, you know, we need to look at short-term measures and also the long-term ones. So for the short-term measure, I think it's very important for Vietnam now to minimize the slowdown. And we are advising the Vietnamese government that we need to focus on three things so that we can minimize the impact of the global slowdown. The first one, you know, Vietnam has created a lot of fiscal and monetary policies to support households and firms. So we need to enforce those policies very, very well. And secondly, you see, we need to maintain our macro stability in terms of inflation, in terms of foreign exchange rate, and also, you know, in terms of other factors. In the long term, I think you see, Vietnam can do three things. The very first one, we should capitalize on the ongoing trends. What are the key trends? We have seen, for example, greening trend, digitalization trend, and also investment shift trend still going on. And Vietnam is very much in a good position to capitalize on those three big trends. Internally, we talked to you before, and as Mr. Hong San have talked about. Of course, we need to continue focusing on three main constraints. Okay, legal framework, especially in terms of consistent policy. Secondly, infrastructure, and then thirdly, human resource. Finally, regarding climate change and going green, Vietnam, need to work out a very specific plan and different combined measures for doing that. In order to do so, I think Vietnam should capitalize on two things. The first one, international cooperation. Okay. OECD and other international organizations may be continuing to support Vietnam in terms of policy framework. And secondly, Vietnam should do a better job in terms of enforcement. We have a very good strategy, we have a very good policy, we have a very good framework, but enforcement still a big thing for Vietnam. So we need to focus on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I mean, international cooperation enforcement you mentioned at last are very, very important. And obviously, I mean, this is essential also to create also an environment. Again, for cooperation, obviously, that's what also we are here for in the OECD. So I think these guys did a pretty good job. A couple of intervention from the audience and or questions or comments. So just maybe please, unless I can do it, identify yourself if you want to intervene, and then maybe with short comment. So I see in the back actually, my OECD colleague, but please introduce yourself.
This is what? Of investment, and I particularly appreciate the focus that on both digitalization and on green transition. And these are two issues that has picked up on quite extensively in the first OECD economic survey of Vietnam that we published in April this year. So if you want to go deeper into these issues and read some more OECD analysis on this, I invite you to have a look at this economic survey, which is freely available on the web. And then we talk about, in the field of digitalization, we talk about to skills, both at the very high level to develop digital tools, but then also at the lower level so that, people can actually use them widely. We talk about the role for government in promoting e-services. We identify scope for enhancing competition and also foreign basic infrastructure services for the digital economy, such as the telecommunications sector. And then in the green area, we also talk and we clearly recognize what Ambassador Pearson said about the particular situation in which a country like Vietnam is, where emissions are still growing faster than GDP is. So clearly this creates additional challenges, and this will create a lot of needs for investment. But we also identify a strong potential for solar, wind, and hydro energy to replace the current reliance on coal and on gas and on oil. And that will, of course, require a lot of investment, but that's what we're all here for today. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jens. And I think it's important because, okay, we like to do evidence-based, analysis, and policy. It needs to have data behind that. So I think that the economic review is important. We have, I think, the ambassadors of Canada to the OECD, and then also the Irish ambassador. And then I think we may have also a comment online, but please. Please, now first, please, Madam Shena, please.
Yes, well, congratulations for all the panelists and the great learning that we are having today. I just want to kind of emphasize two things because you have said it all. So I'm not talking about the challenge. I'm talking more about the opportunities, and I would kind of reinforce two. Like yesterday in the business discussion that we had, like clearly we're saying like how to reinforce collaboration within ASEAN, how to reinforce collaboration between private and public sector. And I think there's a lot of learning there. But I would add, based on what my dear friend Brendan said, as colleague of Australia, clearly we need to look at the world with so many opportunities that we need not to compete, but collaborate more and partner more. So Australia and Canada needs definitely to be partnering with Vietnam to make it happen, I would say, because there are a lot of opportunities there that needs to be leveraged, and no countries can do it all. But this is the learning about how to better partner all together. And it's not easy because our competition side of us is very strong. But that's why having the level playing field with standards that is common to all. And yes, it brings challenge when it comes to the global tax, for example, minimum tax. But at the same time, this is where we need to go in finding the ways how to bring our regulations and standards all together to ease the work together. Last, I would kind of say that the FDI review that Canada has been through is very useful. So I encourage Vietnam to consider this as well, because that's allow a lot of learning to make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And also underlining the role, I think, of international standards is important, and the review. Please, Ambassador, Ambassador to the OECD.
Many thanks coming in, and congratulations to the panel for a very lively and stimulating discussion. And of course, I suppose the larger congratulations to Vietnam for a very impressive development path over the last 20 to 30 years. And Ireland has been proud to support that bilaterally and through the EU. I mean, three comments really. I mean, some 20% of jobs in Ireland stem either directly or indirectly from FDI.
And a priority for all of us in Ireland, of course, is to keep those jobs there. And I think I would highlight three things, and many of them have been mentioned. One is international cooperation and integration. In the case of Ireland, through membership of the European Union, the case of Vietnam and its partners, ASEAN, but also the support that the OECD through SARP is providing. I suppose, secondly, is pro-business landscape regulatory environment. And again, I would highlight the benefits we found nationally from going through the OECD's FDI review. There was a lot of takeaways from us. One of those was to strengthen the linkages between the M&E sector and our domestic SME sector, noting that in all of our economies, the SME sector is a far larger employer than the M&E sector, and making sure that our companies are able to benefit domestically by supplying the M&E sector at home, but also following those companies along their supply chains globally. And that has meant we've had to strengthen connections between our domestic enterprise agencies which scale companies at home in Ireland and help them to internationalize, and our FDI agency, IDA Ireland. So an integrated and whole of government approach, I think, to this is important. But the one I really want to pick up on, and Dr. Van Look mentioned this in particular, and also the colleague from Samsung, is skills. None of the things I have mentioned would enable us to keep jobs in Ireland if we didn't have the skilled labour force to enable us to remain attractive to foreign capital. And I think that speaks to access to education, investment in education, lifelong learning, reskilling, regional and digital education opportunities, but also noticing in our case that in recent years, a significant proportion in the growth of our labour productivity has been down to an increase in female participation in the labour market. And I think that's something that needs to be part of the mix, and I'd be interested to hear the perspectives of the panels on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. We may have an intervention online. I think that then we have to close the floor from Heinrich Foundation.
Yes, thank you very much.
Confirmed, or
yes, thank you.
Maybe.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes. Okay, please.
Hi. Thank you very much. And thank you very much for allowing this.
Just 1 second. We cannot hear you. We see you, but
I'm unmuted.
As if you are muted.
I'm not muted.
Please, perfect. Please go on.
All right. Thank you very much. And thank you for allowing me to make this intervention. I'm Chun-Wei Yap. I'm a research director for the Heinrich Foundation. We're a foundation that is a philanthropy dedicated to advancing sustainable global trade. Thank you, Director General Huang, Dr. Khan, Ambassador Pearson, OECD colleagues. We just want to say that, in this era of headwinds to the global economy, the reforms that Vietnam has undertaken in FDI have been really impressive. We have identified in the econometric analyses that we commissioned the Vietnam becoming a hotspot really in the region for intermediate goods supply chain. And that says something about the policies that Vietnam has already undertaken to make this happen. We also put out, as part of our suite of flagship projects, the Sustainable Trade Index, the latest edition of which we've just released yesterday. And it shows that Vietnam has risen 7 places in its ranking from last year in the overall ranking. And again, this speaks to the particularly the environmental reforms that the Vietnamese government has undertaken, and also with regards to participation of women in the workforce, the human capital that Dr. Khan spoke about. So as a foundation, I'm very proud and very pleased to say that we are contributing in our small way to support the OECD in this FDI Qualities Review study of Vietnam. And we have made a commitment to do so via the kind offices of Forest. And I wanted to just say congratulations and thank you.
Thank you very much. And let me take the opportunity to thank all the supporters, I would say, financial supporters of the work that we have been doing here. Maybe Fares, 10 seconds, we're late, 1 minute on the next steps of the FDI Qualities Review of Vietnam, and then we conclude, please.
Yeah, thank you. First, very much thanks to the panelists for these very insightful remarks. Very quickly, so we also want to thank the Foreign Investment Agency for their strong commitment in working with us. The agency and the OECD will establish and be focal point of a sort of inclusive, informal, and technical task force that will bring together ministries and agencies that are responsible of policy areas at the intersection of investment and sustainable development, as we all agree on this international cooperation side, and the working not in silo side is very important to break. We hope that this task force can meet early 2024 to start the actual work on the FDI qualities review and this policy dialogue. Let me just highlight very quickly that the data I have been showing earlier is just like to open the appetite. We will be undertaking a full-fledged review as we did with Canada and Ireland. And here data will be at the core of this work, including national statistics from Vietnam. And we hopefully will have by the fall of 2024 initial policy recommendation to Vietnam on how to further improve sustainable investment in the country. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much. I think, please, quickly.
Tôi phải xin có một chút ý kiến thế này nhưng mà rất quan trọng. Chúng tôi trước hết tôi phải đánh giá cao cái sự hỗ trợ của OECD trong suốt thời gian qua, trong nhiều năm qua. Những cái báo cáo đánh giá, những cái tham vấn của OECD vô cùng quan trọng đối với Việt Nam, với chính phủ Việt Nam, với các bộ ngành, với các địa phương Việt Nam, để giúp chúng tôi cung cấp cái bộ công cụ để chúng tôi nâng cao hiệu quả cái đầu tư, đặc biệt là những cái ngành mà công nghệ để phát triển bền vững, để kinh tế xanh, để những ngành chúng tôi ưu tiên. Cái thứ hai là giúp chúng tôi rà soát lại và để tham vấn chính sách, sửa đổi luật pháp chính sách, tất cả các lĩnh vực khác nhau, cùng với cả cộng đồng ý kiến của cộng đồng doanh nghiệp. Và cái thứ ba là cái tài liệu của OECD nó vô cùng quý ở cái chỗ là các bạn đã đánh giá rất nhiều quốc gia. Những cái tài liệu bạn tham vấn cho Việt Nam là bạn cũng kế thừa những cái kinh nghiệm đó. Nên chúng tôi học hỏi được rất nhiều. Từ đó mình nhìn thẳng được những cái mặt chưa hoàn thiện của Việt Nam, học hỏi được cái kinh nghiệm của các nước để mà mình có những cái đi tắt, shortcut đấy. Đấy thì cái đấy là những cái mà chúng tôi phải nói là đánh giá cao những cái đánh giá của OECD. Mà những cái tài liệu này thì không phải chúng tôi mà các cấp từ chính phủ, quốc hội là khi nói đến những cái tài liệu của OECD cung cấp là đều có cái giá trị tin cậy cao. Và chúng tôi rất mong rằng các bạn tiếp tục có những cái hỗ trợ chúng tôi để chúng tôi cái cải thiện môi trường đầu tư. Vì hiện nay đang làn sóng đầu tư đang đến Việt Nam. Các bạn biết là chúng tôi nỗ lực, đang rất nỗ lực, tất nhiên chưa đạt được cái yêu cầu của nhà đầu tư. Nhưng mà các bạn cũng ghi nhận cho chúng tôi rằng là Việt Nam đang rất nỗ lực. Mà để có được nỗ lực đó thì trong đó có sự đóng góp của cộng đồng doanh nghiệp, của những lời khuyên của OECD, những đánh giá của OECD. Đấy thì chúng tôi hôm nay thì tôi rất là vui có được rất nhiều thông tin để chúng tôi có thể tiếp thu từ các đồng nghiệp trên panel cũng như là đóng góp của các vị tham dự. Một lần nữa cảm ơn OECD đã cùng Bộ Giao với chúng tôi tổ chức cái buổi tọa đàm ngày hôm nay và để cho chúng tôi có được cái cơ hội để tiếp cận các thông tin của các quý vị. Xin trân trọng cảm ơn.
Thank you very much. So we look forward to the next steps to the FDI qualities review and hope that there will be concrete recommendations. So thanks. I think despite, surely we need to increase female representation in panels, but despite that, these guys, they made a good job. So a big applause for them and thank you very much.
Thank you. So we look forward to more comments from you.
Kính thưa các quý vị đại biểu, các vị khách quý, phiên 1 diễn đàn đầu tư Việt Nam OECD đến đây là kết thúc. Xin trân trọng cảm ơn ông Carmen Dinoa, ông Fares Al-Hussami, ông Đỗ Nhật Hoàng, đại sứ Brandon Pearson, ông Cấn Văn Lực và ông Hồng Sần. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, the first panel has now come to an end. We would like to express our gratitude for Mr. Carmen Dinoa, Mr. Fares Al-Hussami, Mr. Đỗ Nhật Hoàng, Ambassador Brandon Pearson, Mr. Cấn Văn Lực, and Mr. Hong Sun. Sau đây xin kính mời các quý vị đại biểu nghỉ giải lao 10 phút. Phiên 2 sẽ bắt đầu lúc 11 giờ. Xin trân trọng cảm ơn. We will now take a 10-minute break and the second panel will start at 11 a.m. Thank you.
Lên, 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 lên.
Bỏ đi à Long? Bỏ đi à? Thôi, bỏ đi à? Đâu không thay thay biển đâu. Thay biển. Giờ đấy đi lên đi xuống. Nghe bài của cô gửi cho anh để anh không để anh còn biết là chị nói thế nào để có tiếng Việt đấy. Không phải là nó xong đâu đang ngồi vậy. Chân nước lọc. Thằng Kỳ hơi đông. Có gì đâu. Có gì đâu. Hồi chốc nữa mọi người nghĩ em ra. Anh đi mình, em đi giờ đấy không? Đi bộ hơn. Xuống tiếp chỗ một hơi đúng rồi. Tới 7 giờ tối.
Hello. Hello. Hello.
Hello. Good afternoon.
Hello. Good afternoon, Miss Kristen. Welcome.
Yes. Thank you.
Yes. Yes, you're welcome. Thank you for being here today with us. So, can you see our conference room?
Yes, I can.
Yes, and I can see you and hear you very clearly.
Oh, good. I'm glad it
Yes.
works.
Yeah, thank you so much. And our session will start at 11:05 Vietnam time. So in about 4 to 5 minutes, after the next 4 to 5 minutes, we will start the session 2. So I hope that I can keep you online with us.
Yes.
And yes. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank
Then,
you. I will go on mute then.
yes. So we will be back with you in 4 to 5 minutes later. Okay?
Very
Thank you.
good.
Yes.
Thank you.
Days, madam. Yes. Yeah, that's good.
Giờ không có ai cả. Anh phải tầm thật tốt mà nó đâu mình đừng biết. trình nào của Bộ Ngoại giao làm về từ thiện không? Từ thiện thì nhiều. Đất đấy. Thì tôi nói là trong tháng này ra những cái phương án nó chắc trở. Giống như là chương trình với lại tiền mà tổ chức hàng. Bình nhỉ? Cái gì nhỉ? Cái mà Food Festival, cái của ngoại giao đoàn á. Nhưng mà như cuối năm á. Dạ hả? Tại vì bữa cũng chị Tư vợ Tư Trương Tấn Sang á, nguyên chủ tịch nước á, nói là của Bộ Ngoại giao tổ chức thì chị ra thì sẽ báo thông mai. Cái cảnh này nhưng mà bố trí thì đi muốn một cái sân khấu vô luôn nhìn này nên như thế thôi, nhưng mà tại vì cái màn hình nó to quá để thì là kiểu xoay dọc xoay phụ nữ thủ lĩnh toàn cầu với lại của Viet á. Tổ chức ở đây đúng cảm ơn mình. Mà anh ở ngay cái căn chốt ngay chỗ cái nhà chị đi vô cái căn bên ngay chỗ chốt bảo vệ căn đầu tiên đó. Cũng thấy là yeah, we have the bell. Chị cũng chỉ thêm mỗi lần.
Kính thưa các quý vị đại biểu, các vị khách quý, phiên thảo luận 2 của chúng ta sẽ bắt đầu trong vòng ít phút. Xin kính mời các quý vị đại biểu, các vị khách quý ổn định chỗ ngồi trong hội trường. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, the second discussion session will start in a minute. Please be seated. Thank you.
Có cái bằng bao nhiêu hết cho em một anh xin gái đấy cái rồi không để bài ông bác chưa có ông bác này sao em có được bác thì cái bài cái anh của ông ấy gì cái bài exercise bài tên chắc là cái bài không cái đó là hay ông sao đâu. Khi mà mình mắc cho nên là ít được buộc năm rồi mình ta thấy thế bạn nào mà chúng ta mình nước tinh thương nó không kéo dài on stage điệu
Kính thưa các quý vị đại biểu, các vị khách quý, xin kính mời các quý vị đại biểu đến với phiên 2 của Diễn đàn Đầu tư OECD Việt Nam với chủ đề hướng đến tuyên bố OECD về đầu tư quốc tế và các doanh nghiệp đa quốc gia. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the second session of the OECD Vietnam Investment Forum with the theme of Towards the OECD Declaration on International Investment and Multinational Enterprises. Tôi xin trân trọng kính mời ông Stephen Thompson, Phó trưởng Bộ phận Khung Chính sách Đầu tư OECD, ông Alejandro Patino, Phó trưởng phái đoàn Costa Rica tại OECD, bà Virginia Foot, Phó Chủ tịch Hiệp hội Thương mại Hoa Kỳ tại Việt Nam, ông Đỗ Ngọc Quỳnh, Phó Tổng Giám đốc Tập đoàn Sovico, ông Jens Arnold, Phòng Kinh tế OECD lên sân khấu, và xin trân trọng giới thiệu giáo sư Christine Kaufman, trưởng nhóm công tác OECD về ứng xử có trách nhiệm của doanh nghiệp, sẽ tham gia phiên thảo luận của chúng ta qua kênh trực tuyến. I have the honor to introduce the moderator, presenter, and panelist, Mr. Stephen Thompson, Deputy Head of Investment Division, OECD, Mr. Alejandro Patino, Deputy Permanent Representative of Costa Rica to OECD, Ms. Virginia Foot, Vice Chair of AmCham in Vietnam, Mr. Đỗ Ngọc Quỳnh, Deputy General Manager of Sovico Group, Mr. Jens Arnold, Head of Division, OECD of Economics Department, and Professor Christine Kaufman, Chair of Working Party on Responsible Business Conduct of OECD, who will join us via virtual platform. Sau đây xin kính mời ông Stephen Thompson điều hành phiên thảo luận. Now I'd like to introduce the moderator, Mr. Stephen Thompson.
Good morning, everyone, distinguished ambassadors, distinguished participants. This is the second session of the day. I will start by making a presentation. I will be both moderator and presenter. We have short-staffed in the investment division. So I'll go up to the podium and start, and then we will go through the panel discussions. Okay, well, this session is on the OECD Declaration on International Investment and Multinational Enterprises. It's a key instrument of the OECD, but perhaps not well known to the audience. So I will present it. I'll discuss how countries that adhere to the declaration benefit from adherence, and then I'll look at the case of Vietnam and how far Vietnam is away from the standards embodied in the declaration. But some of my panelists today can be forgiven if they don't know much about the declaration. So after we've talked about the declaration, we'll expand the discussion a bit, following the one this morning, and look at the progress Vietnam has made in the business climate and also remaining challenges. But I'll start with the declaration. So the declaration is it's a policy statement, if you like, policy commitment to provide an open and transparent environment for international investment and to encourage the positive contribution that multinationals can make to economic, social, and environmental progress. I think it's a general statement that all of us could agree with. It's one of the softer instruments of the OECD in a way because it's a declaration. It's not a treaty. It doesn't require ratification. It's a declaration of principle in support both of non-discrimination, national treatment, but also responsible business conduct. Now, the declaration is from 1976. It's quite an old instrument, but you can see that already at the time it was a very balanced instrument. It wasn't just about national treatment, market access. It was really about the impact of investors on the host economy as well. Positive contribution we expect multinationals to make. It has 51 adherents, 38 OECD members. I'll show those in a minute. And it's still, even if it's from 1976, it's still an important instrument of the OECD. And at the 2015 ministerial, the OECD ministerial, ministers reaffirmed the importance of the declaration and the importance of having non-member countries adhere to the declaration. So I think that's not to be too subtle about it. That's why we are presenting it today to Vietnam. And it's often one of the first steps when a country wants to come closer to the OECD. It's often one of the first steps that they take because it's a soft approach to the OECD and it allows you to participate in the OECD Investment Committee. Now, there are a number of changes recently in the declaration. There was a targeted update. The declaration includes the multinational guidelines for multinational enterprises. And there was a targeted update this year, but I'll let Professor Christine Kaufmann explain that. We're currently updating the text of the declaration. In fact, if we don't receive any comments by the end of today, it's been approved by written procedure, the new version of the declaration, because after 47 years, we needed to reflect certain new elements, national security, FDI qualities, like we heard from Florence this morning, and also and climate change, obviously, which was not the same issue in 1976. And we're also considering other elements of the declaration to renew it, to keep it up to date over time. Well, this shows the adherence. 51 countries. Mauritius is currently a candidate for adherence. There are another 3 or 4 countries that are discussing with us possible adherence. We've had a steady influx of new countries joining the declaration over time, as you can see. The OECD members are 38 of those countries, obviously, but there are many countries that are not members of the OECD, not on an accession track, but still interested in participating in the work of the committee and adhering to the declaration. Now, the declaration has 2 main elements. First is what we call the national treatment instrument. It's a sort of a standard definition of national treatment, post-establishment, treatment no less favorable in like situation as domestic enterprises. It's a standard definition. You find it in treaties. As I said, the difference here is it's not a treaty. And there is one commitment under the national treatment instrument, and that's to provide a list of exceptions to national treatment. So you commit to non-discrimination as a general principle, and then you list all of the exceptions to national treatment in your domestic legislation. And the second element is the guidelines for multinational enterprises. We've talked a lot about responsible business conduct. It's an element of quality investment, sustainable investment that we've talked about over the past 2 days. And the guidelines are one of the key global instruments on responsible business conduct, but Professor Kaufmann will say a lot more about that. And there is an obligation under the guidelines for adherence to set up what is called a national contact point, which is like a non-judicial grievance mechanism when stakeholders have a case against an investor. Now, if we're trying to see how a country why would a country adhere to an OECD instrument like this? Well, there are certain benefits. One, I think those 13 countries that are not members that have adhered, I think they do so partly because they want to reassure foreign investors that their country meets OECD standards of investment policy. And I think from what I will show you a quick analysis of the case of Vietnam, I think that's a strong case that Vietnam can make in this area too. Second, you improve the transparency of the investment regime by publicizing the list of exceptions to national treatment. It becomes very clear where you restrict foreign investment. And third, we've been talking a lot about doing country reviews with Vietnam. We're doing another one on FDI policies. We've done 2 investment policy reviews. And we're happy to do that. And we think it's very important. From what we've heard from the government, it's a very useful exercise. But ultimately, participating in the work of the OECD in the investment committee is a different level of collaboration. You're not just getting advice from the OECD, you're really contributing to the setting global standards at the OECD. So I think it's a different level of cooperation. And then, of course, like any review, we undertake an investment policy review as part of this process. You benefit from OECD benchmarking and diagnosis. It also could reassure domestic constituencies that because foreign investors are expected to follow the guidelines for multinational enterprises, that they will behave responsibly in the economy. And because Vietnamese investors might start investing abroad as well, it reassures those countries where Vietnam might be investing that they also will adhere, that those investors also adhere to the guidelines for multinational enterprises. This could help Vietnam to integrate into global value chains as well, where RBC elements are becoming increasingly important. And it's a general way of promoting responsible business conduct in Vietnam. Now, I won't go through this. This is very internal cuisine OECD process, but the important point is when a country requests adherence, there's an investment policy review. That review is discussed in a peer review in the investment committee. It's discussed in the working party on responsible business conduct, which is under the investment committee. And then a recommendation is made to the OECD Council, and the Council decides whether to admit a country as an adherent. Now, let's look at Vietnam. How close is Vietnam to the kind of standards that I've described in the declaration? Well, first of all, we've talked a lot about the investment policy reviews we've done. This first one in 2007 to 2009 was actually the first country review of the OECD with Vietnam. And we have a number of examples in Southeast Asia where the investment policy review was the first study that the OECD undertook in the region. We did another one in 2018 with, we had DG Huang here this morning. Under his leadership, we did a second, more comprehensive review. And now, this index has come up a few times. The Secretary General mentioned the FDI Regulatory Restrictiveness Index this morning. It measures statutory barriers to foreign investment. The higher the score, the more restrictive an economy. And what you can see is Vietnam is actually relatively open in an ASEAN context. Therefore, Singapore and Cambodia are more open, but they're small economies, they're more likely to be open. But Vietnam is actually relatively open. I should point out, this is from 2020. This graph doesn't make it very popular when we show it in ASEAN because some countries appear restricted, but all countries have reformed since then. The Philippines has made constitutional changes that will show up when we update it. Vietnam has a new investment law. Indonesia has an omnibus law. So there's a lot of changes. So things are improving in all of these countries in the region, but of course you can see where Vietnam lies. You can see it's above the OECD average. And this is another way of showing it. I actually took this from the economic survey that my colleague Jens produced earlier this year. It's also the index. So as the score goes down, the country becomes more open. And I think it's a very telling depiction of the reform trajectory of a country, because Vietnam is in red, and you can see, you know, in the late 90s, it was still relatively closed economy. It was 10 years after Doi Moi, but still relatively closed compared to the rest of ASEAN. And you can see that over time, it has gradually surpassed the other countries in ASEAN, the other large countries. And the other thing I think that's important is the other countries have reformed and continue to reform, but it's more episodic. There are periods of reform, and then there's a period of static. But Vietnam is a constant reform all the time. Different degrees of reform, sure, but it hasn't stopped. It continues if we had more recent figures. And you can see here too, this is sort of the same thing I showed earlier. Vietnam, in a regional context, Vietnam has a fairly good story to tell, but of course, it's still a bit far from the OECD standard in this area. Now, quickly on RBC, because that's another element that we look at when we undertake this investment policy review as part of adherence. We look at what are the efforts that the country is doing to facilitate RBC. And Vietnam also has a good story here, I think. The National Action Plan for Enhancing Responsible Business Practices is an important document, and the implementation over the next 4 years will raise the visibility of RBC in Vietnam. There's also the Vietnam Corporate Sustainability Index. There's the new labor code, the ratification of some ILO conventions, and also we've talked about the 16 FTAs that Vietnam has with other countries. And of course, some are RCEP or ASEAN, and they're ASEAN FTAs. But Vietnam has some. Vietnam has the EU FTA. It's participating in the CPTPP, which for a country at Vietnam's level of development is quite an achievement. It shows a degree of ambition to meet international standards that we don't often see in other countries. Well, just, of course, there are always areas that can be improved. And this is how perhaps adherence could help Vietnam by providing OECD expertise, investment committee discussions to improve make further progress on RBC in Vietnam. I won't go through this. I'll just conclude. So yes, Vietnam is one of the biggest performers under our FDI regulatory restrictiveness index over time. It's reformed its regime for investment constantly and significantly. But of course, more could be done. We have the economic survey. We will discuss it in the panel. It's not a perfect investment climate. I think we all agree with that. It's a continuous process to improve an investment climate. It's not a one-off reform. And obviously awareness is growing and the legislative framework has been strengthened. So if I could summarize everything in one sentence, I would say that adherence to the declaration could showcase, support, and even strengthen these efforts that I've described today. So with that, I will move to the panel. Thank you. So my next job. Yes. We are first going to have a presentation, a recorded presentation by the Minister Tovar, the Foreign Trade Minister of Costa Rica. Now, Costa Rica and Vietnam are not two countries that you usually see in the same sentence, but in this case, there's a reason why we chose Costa Rica, because Costa Rica adhered to the declaration in 2013. They're the newest member of the OECD, but they've been part of the investment committee for 10 years. And they have participated very actively in the investment committee. And we thought it would be interesting for Vietnam to see the experience of another country. Why did Costa Rica adhere to the declaration and how have they benefited? So with that, perhaps.
Dear friends, I am delighted to address you today on the occasion of the OECD's Southeast Asia Ministerial Forum. Costa Rica views with great interest the engagement of the Asian-Pacific community with the OECD and its work in fostering better policies for the well-being of its population. 10 years ago, Costa Rica became the 45th country to adhere to the OECD's Declaration of International Investment and Multinational Enterprises. We then undertook a policy commitment to provide an open, transparent, and competitive environment for investment aligned with the highest international standards. This was a landmark decision in our pathway to become a member of the OECD, as it was a clear and resolute pledge to supporting an optimal environment for international investors and encourage responsible investment by multinational companies to promote prosperity and growth. It also allowed us, as adherents to the declaration, to fully participate in the Investment Committee, a leading forum for international cooperation on international investment issues. The Investment Committee offers a valuable opportunity for countries to engage in active policy dialogue with peers and to benefit from international good practices and expertise. Our participation in the OECD's Investment Committee has proven to be an enriching experience in which we have been able to contribute with new ideas and lessons learned in many of the challenges we are facing, including how to increase the amount of FDI available to drive the green transition, how to amplify investment beyond its contribution to economic growth towards sustainability outcomes, and how to create a policy framework and environment that can deliver returns for investors and assist governments to address social and environmental challenges. Costa Rica has evolved as a unique investment destination, as it has built a successful track record in attracting FDI in high value-added and technology-intensive sectors. Integrating the Indo-Pacific region into our trade and investment strategy stands as a main priority, particularly in our determined aspiration to become a member of the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, CPTPP. Moreover, it was a crucial step to strengthen the growing ties between Costa Rica and the OECD. The enormous value of adding unique perspectives to the work of the organization, such as ours, a small Latin American nation, centered on sustainability, equality, and integration into the global economy, is precisely why we underscore the importance of strengthening the OECD's regional programs and secure joint learning and exchange of experience among them. As the Latin American region, Southeast Asia has shown resilience as an attractive destination for FDI, and becoming an adherent to this valuable instrument means obtaining reciprocity on national treatment and increasing dialogue opportunities with other adherent countries. We wish you a very productive ministerial meeting and all the best.
Well, we have one representative in person from Costa Rica, so please thank the minister for his remarks. And as we agreed, we'll come back to see if you have anything to add in the closing statement. I think now we'll turn to the virtual participant. She's professor at the University of Zurich, Professor Christine Kaufmann. She's the chair of the Working Party on RBC, which is a subsidiary body of the Investment Committee. Hello, Christine, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Good morning.
Morning. Thank you for participating. We know it's very early in Europe.
Yeah, it's not too bad.
So you heard the presentation, I suppose, that I made on the declaration and the guidelines. But I think it would be interesting for the audience to hear a bit about the role of the Working Party and the recent update of the guidelines that was just completed this year. So perhaps you could say something on that.
Yes, with pleasure. Thank you very much, and a very good morning to all of you from Switzerland. As Stephen said, it's dark, but it's not that early. It's after 6 o'clock. I'm really delighted that I can give you some insights on the OECD guidelines for multinational enterprises on responsible business conduct. As you just heard, they are in the annex to the investment declaration. And to answer the questions that Stephen Thompson just asked, I think I would like to make 3 points. I would like to elaborate a little bit on what the guidelines are in their updated version now. I would also like to tell you a little bit more why they are so unique and make a difference. And then, of course, elaborate a bit more on how adherents benefit from the guidelines. Now, the guidelines are not a binding law. They are recommendations addressed by governments to multinational enterprises. And they are the main instrument that we have in the OECD on responsible business conduct. And when we talk about responsible business conduct, we really mean an expectation that business should make a positive contribution to sustainable development, while at the same time addressing the impacts of its activities. And the impacts of its activities on people, on the planet, environment, and on society. And the beauty of the guidelines is really that they cover essentially all the areas where business interacts with society. So it's not only about human rights, it's about the environment, it's about labor, bribery, consumer interests, disclosure, technology and innovation, and also competition and taxation. The guidelines also come, as you may have heard in the presentation, with a unique government-backed implementation mechanism that we call national contact points. Every country adhering to the guidelines, to the investment declaration, has a legal obligation to establish an effectively functioning national contact point, NCP. Now, these NCPs, most people, if they know about NCPs, they know about the grievance function that they have to serve as a platform to resolve problems in the implementation of the guidelines, but they also have another role that's very important, and that's the promotion of the guidelines. So far, we can really say the guidelines have been a success. We see a broad uptake by business in their policies worldwide, but also by governments. And Stephen just gave some example from Vietnam with free trade agreements and also the CPTT. Now, many of these regulations that we see on RBC these days on due diligence, they are aligned, sometimes fully, sometimes partially, with OECD standards. And this is extremely important for business, that they can operate on a level playing field. Now, you can easily imagine, going back to the history, Stephen gave you an idea, starting in 1976, obviously we had to do something to ensure that the guidelines remain fit for purpose also in the next decade. And this is why we engaged in what we call a targeted update over the last 2 years. And we finished that update this year in June 2023. I cannot go into all the details, but I would like to highlight a few points. What the guidelines do now as we speak is they accommodate new developments such as climate change, the digital transition. We also made important updates with regard to bribery, to include all forms of corruption. We strengthened awareness of the specific risks for vulnerable groups and persons. And we also elaborated on what exactly does due diligence mean in this context. So it's really safe to say that now we have an instrument with the OECD guidelines that addresses all the pertinent responsible business conduct issues that governments and businesses will be faced with in the next decade. In other words, I'm really proud to say that we have the most advanced international government-backed standard on RBC today. Now, as a government, of course, you ask, is this something special? What's the added value of these OECD RBC instrument? And I think it's really important to be aware that the OECD guidelines are not just another responsible business conduct instrument. They're really unique. At this time, they are the only international government-backed standard that we have on responsible business conduct that is comprehensive. It covers all these different interfaces between business and society. And the second important feature from a government perspective, as well as from a business perspective, is that they are very practical. Maybe not at first sight if you read them, but for business, it's practical, it's actionable, because it talks about risk-based due diligence. It's not an abstract concept. And risk-based due diligence essentially means it's a process to help companies to understand what are my impacts in my activities on human rights, on labor, etc. And how can I address these impacts and the associated risks. And what we see to become more and more important, and Minister Tovar also alluded to that, is that this risk-based approach allows a prioritization. So companies can address the most severe impacts first. A third element that is also important and unique is this national contact point mechanism. It's a very specific implementation mechanism that we don't see in any other international instrument on responsible business conduct. Now that, of course, then leads to the question, why would I as a country adhere to this instrument, to the investment declaration, and by doing so also to the OECD guidelines on multinational enterprises? I think the most important aspect really is the signal that you give. As a government, as an adhering country, you create a level playing field for companies with clear, responsible business conduct expectations. Companies in your country, they know what is expected from them. But you also give a signal to other actors in global value chains. And it's very important for companies to operate on this level playing field, to have the certainty of operating at the same level as other actors do in global value chains. A second very important element was already mentioned both in the presentation by Stephen and also Minister Tovar. That's the active participation and learning from peers. Adhering to the guidelines to the investment declaration means you also actively participate in the Working Party on Responsible Business Conduct. And this really is, it's a policy dialogue. You benefit from sharing experiences. You benefit from being an active actor in the development of standards, just as we did with the recent update, but also in developing instruments to facilitate the implementation of, for example, the updated guidelines. And for NCPs, the national contact points, we have established a special national contact point network. And again, there also you discuss best practices, you participate in benchmarking exercises. And what I would also like to mention here is that the adhering countries have now committed to have their national contact points peer-reviewed periodically. And the peer review is a process from which national contact points benefit greatly. We just heard that also from Minister Tovar. They learn from other NCPs, they receive valuable feedback and also recommendations for further improvement from their peers. And let me maybe also say a few words on an instrument that, listening to the presentation before and also reading what Vietnam is engaged in at the moment, there is one RBC instrument in the OECD that I would like to particularly highlight because it was developed in the Working Party on Responsible Business Conduct, and it could be of particular interest to Vietnam. And that's the Council recommendation on the role of government in promoting responsible business conduct. It is again a very pragmatic approach that is being pursued because the recommendation really wants to assist governments and also other public authorities in their efforts to implement responsible business practices. And we all know this is difficult in practice. And you have gone, or you are in the process of going through such an exercise with the development and the implementation of a national action plan on responsible business conduct. So this is a very, very useful instrument to implement such projects. So in sum, I think with the pandemic and the war against Ukraine, they both illustrate how important it is that we become more resilient to global supply chain shocks and crises. And we have seen that OECD responsible business conduct tools and standards, they really help us to achieve this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christine. I think I should have mentioned that a candidate for adherence is peer reviewed in the investment committee, but there is also a discussion in the Working Party on RBC as part of adherence. Well, Christine, please stay on the line. We're running a bit late, but we started late, so I don't know how much time we have left. But I think we'll go to the other panelists, and because you probably hadn't heard of the declaration until this morning, I'd like to ask you a more general question. Virginia is the Vice Chair of AmCham. You've been here a long time. You've seen the tremendous progress that Vietnam has made. But I wonder, what is the experience of your members in Vietnam? Where would they like to see more progress still? Thank you.
Well, thank you. Yeah. Thank you for having me today and doing these last couple of days. I think they've been very interesting to all of us. As you say, I've been here many years from the business side of Vietnam's development, and certainly these kinds of programs where Vietnam is looking at global standards, whether it's through FTAs or international organizations or technical assistance. The US government has provided quite a bit over the years. I think these have really helped Vietnam find its way in the global community and build standards and relationships and contacts that have been enormously valuable for Vietnam. And we're working on, I'm very sorry that the US dropped out of TPP, but it was very good, and the US certainly encouraged Vietnam to go forward with CPTPP. And of course, we hope one day the US will be one of those FTA players. So far, we're not. But nonetheless, the US is the largest recipient of products from Vietnam. So an FTA is obviously very important, but it's not all there is. Much of the FDI investment in Vietnam is driven by the American consumer. We all worried initially that made in Vietnam would be a brand that would be hard in the United States. But in fact, it's turned into, it's taken a while, but Vietnam is one of the best brands. And we've been, so Amazon was just here. There's quite a bit of interest of small and medium-sized companies reaching the US market, and the reputation of crafts, but also manufactured goods is very high in the United States. I think from the current day, as everybody has said, we're at a very interesting, challenging point for Vietnam. As our president was here a month ago or so, the US has upgraded relations. And now we are really trying to, what does that mean for economic relationship? The team from, or an organization of semiconductor companies came on that trip. And we've been working with the Vietnamese on, it's okay to have a goal, but if you're not paying attention to what you need to do tomorrow to reach the goal 2 years from now, you won't get where you're going. And on the semiconductor or on higher level investment in Vietnam in general, the lack of sustainable, predictable power is hugely important. The lack of access to renewable energy is hugely important. Manufacturers are no longer so interested in countries where they can't get access to renewable energy. And while Vietnam has got a lot of sun, a lot of wind, it's very difficult for companies to get access to renewable energy. There are many, many barriers. I won't go into all of them. But there are resources. The World Bank would like to do a transmission project here. So far has not been able to. There's offshore gas. Foreign investors have not been able to develop. The rules for renewable energy are such that foreign investors have not gone in. So we at AmCham and we in the foreign business community have been trying to be very specific about what can we all be doing tomorrow, not 10 years from now, not what's the carbon reduction plan for the future. Right now, Vietnam's plan is to add a lot more carbon in the next 5 to 10 years. Renewables come later. Well, we're trying to say, if you have to do more coal, you, I guess, are going to, but there's financial resources, there are plans, there's technology, there is private investment that is ready and willing to work with Vietnam on transmission, on renewable, on batteries, on the renewable side of energy development. And let's not wait, because it really is going to be important for manufacturing to come to Vietnam. I would have one more point of some of the areas that I think OECD and global standards can be very helpful. Obviously, we're all working on the global minimum tax, but the tax system in general in Vietnam is not global standard. the accounting system, the implementation. A lot of foreign companies are getting caught up in one province, implementing things one way, in another province another way. There's too much decentralization in Vietnam right now. And we're trying to figure out, okay, how do you get some of these cross-border supply chain tax systems get Vietnam more connected up with what the standards are, whether it's APA or offshore accounting. I mean, it's technical and boring, but it's very important to keep foreign investment coming into Vietnam, and particularly foreign investment that needs to cross borders. So I will stop there.
Thank you. Thank you, Virginia. Can you hear me? Yes. I should check how long we have left, because we started late, but do we want to finish at 12 o'clock exactly? It's up to you, Vice Minister. You finish at 12. Okay. You have, okay, we'll be quick. Jens was responsible for the economic survey that just came out this year, and which had some elements of the business climate in it. We have other indicators beyond the index, product market regulation indicators. So perhaps you could just summarize a bit of the findings from the ECHO survey.
Sure. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to present. Is this working? Yeah. For giving me the opportunity to present this work here. I'll try to be really quick. So, at the OECD, we've been building a strong relationship with Vietnam, and, from our department side, the economic survey that we produced in April is really probably the most salient part of that, and we're going even a step further. We're trying to integrate now Vietnam into our OECD Economic Outlook, which is our conjunctural publication that comes out twice a year. And we're really impressed with the progress that Vietnam has made, both in terms of growth. The economy has been growing at almost 7% from 1990 to pre-pandemic. Per capita GDP is now at 25% of the OECD. That's twice what it was back in 2000. And at the same time, there's also been this constant progress, as Stephen said, in terms of reforms, and reforms have a lot to do with this. But if you look at the upcoming challenges, then maybe there's even a case for stepping up those reform efforts and becoming a little more ambitious there. I'm saying this because in the past, growth in Vietnam has relied to one extent on capital accumulation, but then also on a growing industrial labor force that had the opportunity to draw on a hidden labor reserve in rural areas. And that hidden labor reserve is likely to be less available in the future. And if you add on top of that the population aging process that Vietnam is experiencing, then maybe there's even a stronger reason to accelerate sort of the next engine for growth, which is productivity. And if you want to be stronger in productivity, then that's where reforms come in. That's where it's really important that you try to do better. And we analyze a number of areas in our report, but maybe let me just focus on one quickly here, and that is competition. In fact, competition is really one of the key drivers of productivity, because it is what incentivizes firms to become better, to reduce inefficiencies, to innovate, to design new processes, new products. And so that's really important for productivity growth going forward. And we have at the OECD the product market regulation indicator, which measures the extent to which regulations influence the competitive environment in which firms operate. And we find that often it is actually regulatory policies that, be it on purpose or not, limit the extent of competition that we have in key sectors. And what we find from this indicator is that Vietnam is clearly within the range of the OECD countries. So that means it's better than a few other non-member emerging market economies. But within that range, it's probably on the less favorable side. So that means that there's still sufficient scope for improving the competitive framework and for improving regulations. And a few things that are coming up is, for example, entry barriers in network industries. Services are very important as an input for all sorts of manufacturing activities. And there we still have scope, for example, for expanding the foreign engagement or the possibilities for foreign engagement in basic services in the transport and the energy and in the telecommunication sector, for example. Then there's also a possibility to ease the administrative burdens on SMEs, particularly when it comes to the acquisition of land and to access to finance. And here's an area where there's significant differences across different provinces in Vietnam. And then there's also scope to work on the insolvency framework. It's not only entry and barriers to entry that are important for having reallocation of resources towards the most productive uses, but it is also the exit dimension. So whether a firm can exit the market quickly and liberate those resources that can then be picked up by another more successful company. And finally, there's the issue of price controls, of which there are still a few in this economy. And on that note, I will close in the interest of time. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jens. Well, I must apologize to our last panelist here who is squeezed for time, but perhaps you could introduce briefly your views on the discussion we've had today. You're Deputy General Manager of Sovica Group. You have a lot of experience in the financial markets in Vietnam. So please, 2 minutes, please. 2 minutes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for allowing me to attend this conference. I'm Quỳnh. I'm Deputy CEO of Sovica Group. We are one of the leading private conglomerate in Vietnam. We are investing in aviation, in financial service and property development. And recently we are developing our business in renewables energy. And I am also the General Secretary of Vietnam Bond Market Association. I've been working in the financial market in Vietnam for almost 30 years. So today I got the question from the organizer about the role of the financial market in Vietnam in helping the government and the economy to promote the sustainable development in the economy. So I think that's from my personal experience, financial market played a very important role because we have a very key function, raising the money, the capital from the economy, from the society, and allocate the resource, the capital into the economy in a kind of very wisely and very effective way. So when we create the channel to allocate the capital into the economy, if we have a very clear guidelines from the government and from the international community, that I mean that the financial market can allocate the capital in a very effective way. That can help to promote the sustainable development in the economy. So in recent years, I think the government of Vietnam in general and the Ministry of Finance and the Central Bank of Vietnam already proactively issued a lot of policy to promote sustainable finance in Vietnam, especially in environment protection. So we did discuss a lot about the green financing, about green bond, about carbon emission financing that can help the company to reduce the carbon emission in the economy. So I think the total outstanding loan for the green finance in the banking system in Vietnam already reached about 5% of the total outstanding loan in the market. So if we have a more clear guideline from the government, that if the government comply with OECD guideline as you presented, I think it will be very good, very clear for the financial market in Vietnam to create a kind of suitable product and service that can help to promote sustainable financing or sustainable development in Vietnam in the time to come. So in Sovico, as I said, we invest in aviation and in financial service. In SD Bank, we already finance about almost 600 million USD for company to invest in sustainable and renewable energy. And we also work with DFC like IFC, IDB, and also IFD, DEZ. So all the development finance corporation in international market to disburse about 300 million USD for company in Vietnam who invest in sustainable business in Vietnam in the past few years. So for Vietjet, we are also looking for sustainable, I think, airline fuel. So that can help to reduce the carbon emission in the time to come. So I mean that a lot of company in Vietnam, including our company, we are proactively apply more and more international practice to develop and to restructure the business so that can have a kind of more sustainable business in the time to come. So it will be very good if we can have a kind of very clear guideline from OECD being applied in Vietnam so that we can, like the professor just share with us, I think it's very good that we can work with international partner more easy and we can attract more capital into Vietnam in the time to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you for being brief. I'm very sorry that we're running out of time, and I'm sorry that I promised you some closing remarks, but I've also promised the Vice Minister that we will finish. I would have liked to open to questions from the floor as well, but we'll have to come back and do this at the next ministerial. So thank you. Let's thank the panelists.
Xin trân trọng cảm ơn ông Stephen Thompson và các diễn giả về phiên thảo luận hết sức sôi nổi với nhiều thông tin bổ ích. Thank you, Mr. Stephen Thompson and the panelists for a very exciting and enriching discussion. Tiếp theo chương trình, xin trân trọng kính mời bà Nguyễn Minh Hằng, Thứ trưởng Bộ Ngoại giao Việt Nam phát biểu bế mạc diễn đàn. Next, I have the honor to invite Ma'am Nguyễn Minh Hằng, Deputy Foreign Minister of Vietnam, to deliver the closing remark.
I will be very brief, I promise. So, Excellencies, Ambassadors, Head of Delegations, Business representatives, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Vietnam and also on behalf of the Ministry of Planning and Investment, I would like to thank you all for your active participations and lively discussions this morning. Building upon your insightful inputs, I just would like to highlight two key points. First one, from different perspectives, we all agree that constantly changing global investment poses various challenges, but also promises lots of opportunities. As many say, this would create new winners and losers. Thus, it is imperative for governments and businesses to stay updated to the new investment standards and the regulations so as to make timely policy adjustments to seize the opportunities while prevent risks and challenges. For that, I would like to commend the OECD for sharing OECD standards and policy recommendations. And I hope that in the time to come, you will continue to strengthen your engagement with the Southeast Asia and devising new standards and regulations and helping the countries in the region adapt to the new global investment context, environment, and standards. And the second point, I would like to note that Vietnam's economy shows great resilience. With robust growth and dynamic connectivity, Vietnam is a promising destination for sustainable and quality development. And I would like to thank you for your comprehensive review and insightful recommendations in helping Vietnam to boost a better investment, to stay competitive to the global investment map, and to uplift Vietnam's positions on the global supply chain. On the future path of green, low carbon, and digital transitions, we look forward to your continued support and cooperation, either by expanding your business in Vietnam or by exchanging best practice, sharing ideas, or helping Vietnam in our regulatory reform. So distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, yesterday OECD Southeast Asia Ministerial Forum and today's Investment Forum have opened up new opportunities for cooperations within Southeast Asia countries and the OECD. As a CIP co-chair, Vietnam will continue to work very closely with Australia to actively contribute to this process. To conclude, I just want to say a few words to express our sincere thanks to OECD Secretariat, to all our colleagues in the OECD and from all our colleagues in Australia for your great support, for your close cooperations in organizing the very important activity of the SIP program this year in Hanoi again. And I would also like to thank all the speakers, the delegates, for your active participations in the yesterday forum as well as today. And I would also like to thank all the members of the organizing committees, interpreters, technical staffs, the reporters, the new agencies whose work is so essential for the success of our events. So I'd like to conclude here, and once again, I thank you all for your active participation, for your presence here in Hanoi, and I wish you all the best of good health and success. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Excellency. Xin cảm ơn Thứ trưởng Nguyễn Minh Hằng. Tiếp theo, xin trân trọng kính mời ông Andreas Scholl, trưởng ban hợp tác và quan hệ toàn cầu OECD phát biểu. Next, I have the honor to invite Mr. Andreas Scholl, Director of OECD Global Relations and Cooperation Directorate, to deliver his remark.
Thanks so much, Deputy Minister Han, dear friends, ambassadors, friends, colleagues. Thanks so much to you, Deputy Minister Han, and your team and the colleagues from the Minister of Planning for hosting us. It's an amazing, outstanding hospitality we receive all the time when we come to Hanoi. And this is probably also one of the reasons why Vietnam is such an attractive investment place, because also there is so much hospitality here in the country. Thanks to all our panelists also today, our attendees, for engaging in such a constructive, interesting discussion on how Vietnam can keep building on its impressive track record of attracting FDI. I want to just mention 5 takeaways from our today's discussion in 3 minutes. So first, as said also by my Secretary General this morning, Vietnam can be very, very proud of the achievements of economic reform, of its openness to trade and investment, which has created a very remarkable, resilient economy. A striking fact is that Vietnam has not experienced negative annual economic growth since the launch of the Doi reforms in 1986. And this is despite the Asian financial crisis, the global financial crisis, the COVID pandemic. So really a remarkably resilient economy. FDI continues to grow despite a global reduction in investment flows, and Vietnam is now in a position where it can focus on the quality and in the sustainability of FDIs, which was one of the topics of our today's forum. Second, we believe at the OECD, and we partner for that, that policy reform could and should continue. We, for example, observe that FDI restrictions in Vietnam are lower than OECD average when it comes to manufacturing, when it comes to agriculture, but they are higher when it comes to services. So there is still some scope, some potential. We also observe some sectors where we could make significant contribution to sustainability goals with further liberalization. This includes transport, telecoms. This includes also the state-owned enterprises, where one of our recent reviews shows that more could be done to create a level playing field between the private and the state-owned enterprise sector. Third, we are also looking forward to continue deepen our bilateral engagement, bringing Vietnam closer to OECD standards, good policy practices. The quoted FDI quality review of Vietnam will benchmark Vietnam's investment environment. The review also aims to identify reforms to attract high quality, and this is the quality part of the investment story, FDIs that boost inclusive growth, productivity, digital green transition. We very much hope that this will also bring Vietnam closer to our recommendations on FDI quality for sustainable development, recommendation on the role of government in promoting responsible business conduct. and we very much look forward to work with you on this. Fourth, we are very glad to see that Vietnam is also moving closer to the OECD investment declaration with respect to both national agreement and the RBC instruments. We would warmly welcome this, and it's up to Vietnam to decide how quick and when and how you move closer to this declaration, but we would warmly welcome this, and the participation of the OECD Investment Committee would also give Vietnam another access to OECD instruments and another access to shape the conversation. So this would be also an avenue for Vietnam to become a standard setter in global investment policy. Of course, one of the pillars of our strategy, and I'm glad that Carmine Di Noia is with us today and the co-organizer, co-sponsor of this event today. We have developed a strategy for developing and emerging economies to have more, better, and safe foreign direct investment, which we have presented to the G7 2 weeks ago in Marrakesh. And one of the pillars of this strategy is strengthen regional cooperation, regional policy dialogues. And with Vietnam's strong track record on FDI reform, we look forward to also reap the benefits of these opportunities to partner under this strategy to share the experience with other Southeast Asian countries and help support more and better safe FDI in all regions. And let me also say in this context, Steve Thompson is here with us, and he has been a pioneer in the investment policy reviews of Vietnam, which made a contribution in that respect. And this is something together with the regional strategy we can build on. Finally, fifth and last point, and this is what our partnership and friendship stands for. The OECD and Vietnam are also strong partners in this regional context. Very glad to have Vietnam as a co-chair together with Australia, Ambassador Pearson, in the Southeast Asia regional program. And these last 2 days show how much we can achieve together. So there's this saying in South Africa, if you want to move fast, walk alone. If you want to move far, walk together. And this is something which is with us. I think we can, with Vietnam, we can move fast and far. And very grateful, Deputy Minister Hang, to you and your colleagues for all this, and count on us to continue on this way. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Mr. Andreas Shaw. Kính thưa các quý vị đại biểu, các vị khách quý, Diễn đàn đầu tư OECD Việt Nam 2023 đến đây là kết thúc. Xin cảm ơn các quý vị đại biểu và xin kính chúc các quý vị đại biểu nhiều sức khỏe và thành công. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, the OECD Vietnam Investment Forum 2023 has now come to an end. We wish all distinguished guests and delegates best wishes of health and success. Thank you.